speaker for more than a minute, it'll shut off, but then you just have to press. Good afternoon, We would like to start in a few minutes, so I would encourage people to come in and take a seat.
Anything from analysis to my colleague referred to me as the in-house nerd. That would be nice.
1 2 1 2 testing 1 2.
Hello again. I'm hoping that the second time is a charm and that people will come in and take their seats so that we can get started in a few minutes. I'm also not averse to going and helping you come in.
We're still herding cats here, so we hope all you cats will start to take your seats. We'd like to get started here pretty quickly.
Marjorie, a few things to note with all of the microphones. Don't hit mute. Don't hit mute.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start the program. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to the City University of New York School of Law. My name is Carmen Waitas, and I'm a professor at the law school. I'm also the founding director of the Community and Economic Development Clinic. I want to kick off the event by welcoming you on behalf of the clinic, as well as the Democracy Collaborative and the Cerna Foundation, who are co-organizers, and we will hear from as well after me. We have designed what we hope is a very exciting program for you today, and we look forward to the panelist presentations and your engagement with the panelists. We're actually pretty excited. We had about 200 people sign up to attend the program today, and we also have about 200 people signed up for the live streaming of the event. So it's good to see so many familiar faces and new faces as our movement grows and we do this important work together. I want to share with you why I think it's special that we're here at CUNY Law. Not only because I work here, but this is the reason why I work here. As a public law school, we are dedicated to practicing law in the service of human needs, and we have been recognized as the #1 public interest law school in the nation, and we take pride in that, not for recognition's sake, but because it's meaningful in terms of the type of lawyering that our students do upon graduation and the type of lawyers that they become in the movement for social justice. In terms of my clinic, which I founded about 8 years ago, we do our work in hope of fulfilling the law school's mission as well. And we have about 3 primary practice areas: affordable housing, workers' rights, and community. So, of course, the worker co-op docket is most relevant to today's event, and wanted to share with you some of the work that we do in that context. We are part of a coalition in New York City that is called the New York City Cooperative Coalition. And about 2 years ago, we came together. The Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies convened a group of advocates, practitioners, and other people who were in. 2 years ago, we received funding from the New York City Council, which we were very grateful for and excited about. And in that first year, in 2014, the City Council funded us in the amount of $1.2 million, and I believe it was the first municipality to do this. In the second year, which last year, we received $2.1 million, and I will shamefully say right now that we hope to receive funding again for this year. And like most of our projects, in terms of when we take risk and do innovative work, it has been written up that we also help spark interest across the nation and other states as well. I know that the Grassroots Economic Organizing newsletter and Forbes wrote up a couple of pieces on the work that we were doing in New York City and the coalition, as well as an organization that the clinic is a co-founder of, and also the Mondragon North American Delegate is a co-founder of, One Worker, One Vote, worked with people in Madison to also help a similar project get off the ground there. And they outshined us a little bit in terms of the funding amount, and their funding is $5 million. And we are happy about that, because it's not a competition, right, in terms of our cooperative values. We are hoping that more work in terms of wealth building, and it's not wealth building just to create wealth. In the context of the economic climate that we're currently living in, we have not seen such disparities and such a high level of income inequality since the Great Depression. And we know, as advocates and people that do this work and support the work, that the worker cooperative model is important to stemming the surge of that income inequality. And again, the importance of having a living wage and having businesses that will remain in the community is important in terms of building up the community itself, and also what it means for people's lives. And I always like to take the time to remember that that's why we do businesses. And doing this work to create social justice, we know that raising the living wage and working with communities that are engaged in this type of work is meaningful to people in terms of being able to pay their rent, spend time with their children in terms of the hours that they have to work in order to make ends meet. And that is the real reason to do this work, and and form these networks in collaborations to support the expansion of worker co-ops. So I'm going to take this opportunity to let Phil Henderson come up from the Serdna Foundation and also introduce the Serdna Foundation's work and talk about the reasons why they have dedicated their foundation in supporting worker cooperatives.
This was to keep Marjorie from having to walk across the stage again. Great to be here with you all today. I'm Philip Henderson. I'm the president of the Serdna Foundation and one of the sponsors of the event today, one of the sponsors of this publication that was included in all of your materials. And I have a number of colleagues here today because we're a foundation that's based just across the river in Midtown, only a couple of subway stops from here, so a number of us could come over today. But I want to point out just two people in particular. One is a member of our Board of Trustees, Larry Griffith, who's come up from Baltimore. It's great to have you with us, Larry. You know, we're a family-governed institution, and Larry Griffith is one of the large extended family that sits behind the Serdna Foundation's now 99 years of operation in efforts to improve. And then Shauna Scoffrey, who you will see has written the preface of this to this really terrific publication by the Democracy Collaborative. And Sean, I point out because he's the director of our what we call our Strong Local Economies program, which is principally focused on issues that we're going to be talking about today. But Sean has really dedicated his career to many of the issues that we care about at the Serdna Foundation and that are really going to be present in our conversations today. So I would encourage you to reach out to Larry and to Sean to learn more about what the Serdna Foundation is up to. I'll just say a couple of words about Serdna because I think the reason you're all here is not to hear introductory speeches, but to hear what the experts have to say. But I want to give you a little bit of a flavor of who we are. So we're a foundation that's all about fostering just and sustainable communities in the United States. And I think when you hear that, you say, oh, well, then Serdna must be an environment funder. Because oftentimes we confuse sustainability with purely an environmental play, and certainly about the way our communities are built, we think about the economic opportunity in our communities, and we think about the culture that underlies what really great communities are all about and really is the fabric of those communities. And so we look at sustainability in this broader way, and then we lead with just and sustainable communities. And we mean by that explicitly that we care about social justice, or you might say we care about inclusion and equity. And so these themes are very present in all of our work, and particularly in the work that we engage in the support of Democracy Collaborative and others that are present here today. I want to just say one word, a shout out really to Ted Howard, because one of the things we know is that we're a foundation. We have a 28-person staff. We sit in offices here in Midtown. We give grants all over the United States. Our ability to affect change, our ability to make just and sustainable communities happen depends on partnership. And in fact, Carmen and I were chatting on the way over, I don't know where you've disappeared to, Carmen, on the way over, about some of the things she's been engaged in that CERN has been funding as well. But the only way change really happens is for groups on the ground who are doing work every day or making that change happen. And so we rely on those partnerships. And the partnership with the Democracy Collaborative, Ted, with you and your team, has been one of the great examples in my time, my 9 years at the foundation, for the kind of work that we think is valuable. And certainly this publication, Marjorie and Sarah, really congratulations on the terrific work on this. I know we're going to hear from you, Marjorie, in just a minute about the contents of this terrific publication, but we couldn't be more pleased at the way these issues, the things we care about, and the work of the Democracy Collaborative intersect. And I'll just name a couple of things where we really see coincident interest and really co-learning. The power of anchor institutions. Seems obvious, but getting big institutions that are permanently based in these communities that we care about to really turn their economic power to creating more opportunity for the communities that have been struggling in these places is something that's extremely important. And we've been learning alongside Ted and his team and others in this space, really excited about that. The idea of collaboration. We're going to be hearing a lot today, in fact, one entire panel about collaboration. We really believe any success in moving communities, moving economic opportunity requires elected officials, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and other actors to be working in concert to actually create that change. I mentioned equity and inclusion earlier. We truly believe, and I think it's written, we'll hear about it today, that if you don't have equity and inclusion over the long term, your community is not going to thrive. And so social justice matters, inclusion matters, paying attention to those who have historically been left out of economic opportunity is critical to long-term success. And then the question of wages, ownership, asset development, really thinking differently about how we can share ownership of the economic assets, think differently about what it means to be a worker. These are things that we have been exploring together, and I think, again, we'll hear some of that today. Hearing today about both the things that have worked and also the things where we've had to do some trial and error to find solutions that might be better than the ones we thought of before. I'm going to be listening for that. I'm really excited about that today. And I just want to say it's really a pleasure for us at the CERN Foundation in our 99th year to be a small contributor to this dialogue, to be able to provide some funding and some staff expertise. I pointed out Sean, but his whole team is here, really trying to think hard about where we can place our dollars, place our intellectual capital, deploy our networks in service of these things. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Marjorie, to come and talk to us a little more about the nuts and bolts. Great to be with you. I hope it's a scintillating afternoon.
So the panelists will now have no water, but somehow we'll survive. So scintillating. I hope we can rise to that bar. So thank you, Phil. Thank you, Carmen, for your opening remarks. And we're thrilled to have both of you as co-organizers of today's event. Yeah, we're very thrilled at the caliber of people here today. As Carmen said, there's at least another 100 people watching by live stream. We know in Denver, 25 people, including from city government, have gathered in one room and are watching. So here's a shout out to Denver. And, you know, there's an extraordinary caliber of people here in the room today. I invite you to, when you can, look around and meet who's here. We have heads of city government, and state government. We have executives from major nonprofit hospitals and universities, some leading academics, and some longtime cooperative developers, some real leaders in this field, progressive business, progressive journalism, Federal Reserve signed up. So it's an amazing group of people here, and we see this as really emblematic of what's happening around the country. There's something exciting happening in cities today, and it's beneath the radar of mainstream awareness. I mean, we talk a lot about, of course, the federal election, presidential election is on all of our minds. It's dominating all the news. But we really see that the future is growing today in cities. And I would say it's at the seed stage. I think maybe it's at the sapling stage. Something exciting is beginning, and the people here in this room are part of that. And we see it as there's new economy work that has been going on for a long time. I mean, we know cooperatives have been around for over a century. But what is happening right now, we think there's a significant trend for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, this work is coming out of silos and beginning to touch local government. We think this is creating a flashpoint where this work could really begin to go to scale. As Carmen said, there's huge concern about inequality. There's a completely different kind of conversation possible today, and an urgency to this work. The people are looking for solutions. There's just a tremendous surge of work, particularly in worker cooperatives. Carmen was a little too modest. That what's happening in New York City, in the last year alone, they have doubled the number of worker co-ops. So that's an extraordinary accomplishment. So when you see people coming together, when you see city government beginning to support this, something different begins to happen. Something begins to happen at a different magnitude, a different scale. We really see it as the seedbed of a new progressive movement. So we're thrilled here to have some remarkable people. A lot of the leaders of this work we tried to get here in the room today, and I think we have succeeded. We've heard about what's happening in New York City. We also have Carl Hesty, who's with the State of New York Assembly. He'll be talking about how the state is growing local economies. We're thrilled to have Roger Green, who's a longtime leader of human rights and civil rights. He's now with Medgar Evers College. He was for a quarter century in the New York State Assembly. And of course, we know that with what's happening in the cities and with Black Lives Matter, that's another key component of the flashpoint that we're reaching today. We have Paul Soglin from Madison, Wisconsin. He's been a long-time mayor there, and Madison has stepped up. We're told that Paul wanted to do better even than de Blasio, and pledged $5 million to support worker co-ops. So we're thrilled to have Paul here. Also, Rebecca Kemble is with us from Madison. She's been a longtime member of the City Council. She's president of U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. So, Madison is one of those places that already has a lot of worker co-ops. It has a particular ecosystem of support for worker co-ops. And Paul Soglin has said, perhaps the official motto of the city might be 77 square miles surrounded by reality. I'm told the City Council didn't go for that, but I think that's a good description of where we are today, too. From Cleveland, we were delighted to have Tracy Nichols, who's the city economic development leader. It's a great example in Cleveland of the cooperation of Cleveland Foundation, a real leader in developing the Evergreen Cooperatives, a network of 3 worker-owned cooperatives. The city worked on that. We were proud to help with that, too. So again, it's this collaborative work. From the great city of Rochester, we have Mayor Lovely Warren. And they're right now exploring, can they do something kind of like Evergreen, maybe starting with a hub of a nonprofit support that might grow cooperatives, it might help scale them through anchor contracts, it might help create conversions to worker ownership. So that's at a very early stage, and we're happy to be working with them. We have Elena Gorder with Nexus Community Partners. They're doing some tremendous work in St. Paul on community wealth building. Patrick Horvath is with Denver Foundation, and there, the Office of Economic Development, they're working with the local nonprofit Revision. It's a very exciting model. Immigrant families are being helped to grow food in their own backyards. We had the pleasure of visiting one of these families. We were told that they grew literally hundreds of pounds of food out of their own backyard. And now they'll be able to sell the surplus of that to a new food cooperative that's being started. So again, you see a foundation, you see the city, you see city economic development. So this is, again, as an example of what's forming. And from Newark, we have Deputy Mayor Baye Adolfo-Wilson, who is in charge of economic development. And he's working with the mayor there on collaborative and inclusive economic development. So what we're seeing here is something that we call community wealth building. Now, this is a term that was devised by my colleagues Steve Dubb and Ted Howard back in 2005. Steve's here with us, I believe, somewhere. Steve's on a call. Well, Steve's always at work. There's a shout out to you, Steve, for your great work. And we find that this phrase is catching on. The city of Richmond, Virginia now has an Office of Community Wealth Building. In New Orleans, we have done community wealth building roundtables to look at, how can you begin to create jobs for those about half of African American men who are not working in New Orleans. So this phrase is catching on. And I want to talk just a little bit. I'm going to pull out my wonk hat here now and tell you a little bit about what are some of the drivers of community wealth building. We see this as really a systems approach. It's a new paradigm of economic development, an emerging paradigm. And it starts with place. It's not rooted in the ethereal world of finance, but love of place, a particular place, and beginning to build the assets of that place. You want to keep wealth rooted locally through broad-based ownership, local ownership. A third driver is anchor procurement, so you have that multiplier effect of money circulating and not leaking out. Collaboration, as we've seen in all these examples, is integral to this. It's not just cities going off and doing something on their own or cooperative developers going off on their own, but there are these new collaboratives coming together. And inclusion is really at the heart of it. Rather than, say, growing a downtown and hoping that by trickle down that's going to benefit everyone, inclusion is there at the very start of this work. So when we say that we see as the seedbed of a new progressive movement, there's a reason that people don't recognize that, because it's social change of a very different kind. It's not the federal government. It's not like some new Voting Rights Act or something. It's arising at the level of cities. And it's less about protest or about regulation than about asset building and building assets of many kinds. It's not initiated solely by government. A lot of it comes from the community. And so it's this different kind of movement. It's activists are certainly there. We certainly see that in New York. There's been a huge activist component. But there's also major anchor institutions. We're talking, hospitals with billions of dollars, universities, foundations, unions. So there's like this different kinds of players and a different kind of movement. So here within this room surrounded by reality, we're hoping that what takes root here will grow. I want to give you just a brief idea of what the day is going to be like. We have two panels for you. The first is our mayor's panel and other government leaders, and that's going to be chaired. We're thrilled to have Harold Meyerson from the American Prospect, a longtime hero of mine as a writer, and he may be known to you as the column he did for the Washington Post for a long time. And we'll go until about 3. The last half of that, we're going to take questions from the audience. So please gather your questions. We want to hear from you. We will not be using the microphones in the room. We'll have Carmen will be our lovely master of ceremonies, and she will come around with a microphone for you. So the last half hour, about 2:30 to 3, we'll be doing questions. We'll take a break at 3, about 15 minutes. And if you need restrooms, they are out this way and down the hall. We'll have a second panel, which is really about economic development. So we'll have leaders, and I'll allow Ted to introduce that panel. So he'll be chairing that, our President Ted Howard. And then, so again, the last half hour we'll do questions. About 4:45, I'll offer a few thoughts on some of the themes we heard today, and then we'll have a reception from 5 to 7. We hope you'll stay, and if I can lure you, we will have free food. We'll have some free booze. Maybe that will entice you to stay and kind of get to know some of these wonderful people in this room. So, thank you so much for coming. It's a great lineup today. And I'd like to pass the baton to our first panel. Thanks. So if those first panelists, please join us. Oh, I see you have water now, so life is good.
Speed, make sure the red comes on.
Well, welcome. I'm delighted to be here for the Democracy Collaborative and CERDNA and CUNY, a terrific public university system. I should mention that my father, I think, probably graduated from a predecessor of the CUNY School of Law, Brooklyn College Law, in 1938. I bring up my father because he also, in his spare time, was the board chairman in the 1950s and 60s of the Twin Pines Co-op in Santa Monica, California. I have roots here, and I'm delighted to be here. I did a story for the American Prospect a couple issues ago on Speaker Heastie's bailiwick, the Bronx, and I noted that there are now, as the New York real estate boom more or less runs out of places in Manhattan and Brooklyn to boom any further, it has reached parts of the Bronx. There are plans for market rate high-rises going up on the Harlem River, right across from Manhattan. And I wondered in the piece if this was going to be an example of, the ecological term is riparian growth, that you have a stretch of affluence right by the river. Riparian growth is like trees that grow on the riverbank but are not replicated as you go further inland. It's kind of the geographic expression of a tale of two cities that the mayor of this city used as the theme of his campaign in 2013. We've seen this before. I was the executive editor of the LA Weekly in Los Angeles throughout the 90s, and I noted that there was places in the city along Wilshire Boulevard, sort of in some ways the rather dull but official Main Street of Los Angeles. And, you know, again, relatively high-rise offices, but if you went just, you know, a block or two away, you had Central American immigrants living in abject poverty. And so a lot of what the very good public servants who are here today are dealing with is trying to move that zone of whatever is the antithesis of reality, or rather create a new reality so that the prosperity extends beyond the Harlem River, beyond Wilshire Boulevard. That's what we'll be hearing today. At the American Prospect, I and we have done a lot of writing about the issues that are under discussion today. I've did a piece several years ago, right after de Blasio's election, that I think is cited in the study that's being released today that you all have in your packets, just noting this development of a distinct urban politics. a new kind of city politics. At the moment, by my count, of the 30 largest American cities, 27 have mayors who are Democrats. Now, that doesn't always translate out to any particular political content, but it's the most one-sided partisan evolution. I had an intern at the Prospect go back and try to see when there was such an imbalance. And somewhere in the mid-19th century, he gave up. There really wasn't a time when you could find this. And you could find what I had noted was distinct urban coalitions of immigrant groups, of community groups rooted in the African American community, many of them successors to ACORN, of reform groups, of environmental groups and environmental justice groups, of unions, which are usually a major part of this, though not necessarily the public sector unions, often private sector unions that reflect in their demographics the changing demographics of these cities. And because of the density of these groups in these cities, you are seeing a level of change in these cities which has not yet reached the states, or as we heard the quote of what Paul had said, the reality zone outside. The gaps at times between what we think of as red states and the cities within those states can be pretty huge. We find that Nashville has recently elected a mayor who's a proponent of gay marriage and a higher minimum wage. I'm sort of incredulous because my mother grew up in Nashville around the time of the Scopes trial, and so it's a real change. We find that Phoenix, in the middle of the incredibly anti-immigrant legislation that was enacted in Arizona, that Phoenix actually, the city council supported immigration reform. Really, just massive disparities between where cities are at and where states are at. And that's one reason why we're going to be hearing today from mayors, from a deputy mayor, and from the Speaker of the New York Assembly. So let's begin with the Mayor of Rochester, the Honorable Lovely Warren.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you, Harold, and thank the Democracy Collaborative for putting on this event, and the CUNY School of Law and the Sundress Foundation. Truly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the challenges that we're experiencing in Rochester, but also our great opportunities. The city of Rochester is located in upstate New York. For those that know Rochester a little bit, we are home to Kodak, Xerox, and Bausch & Lomb. Back in the late 1980s, 1990s, those industries significantly downsized in our community. And because of that, we had some unintended consequences. Today, Rochester is second in the nation for cities of a similar size for childhood poverty. Today, many of our residents are struggling to find opportunity. When you look at our neighborhoods, they are struggling to survive. And our population has significantly declined from being about 240,000 in 1980 to now being about 210,000. And so as mayor, we have many challenges. But I am happy to say that we also have some great opportunities. I want to acknowledge the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, Speaker Carl Heasties, for the support that the state is giving to Rochester at this point in time, with also the support of the governor. Last year, the governor started an anti-poverty initiative that really affected Rochester, and the Speaker and his leadership and also the Senate supported that with dollars for us to really focus on the challenges that our most vulnerable citizens are experiencing. When you look at Rochester, you could live there your entire life and never see poverty. You don't know that it truly exists because it is so concentrated. People come into the city to work and they go home. When you look at our educational institutions, the city school district is very challenged. You can move 15 minutes away and be in one of the best school districts in the country. And that's very challenging for us to get people in our community and abroad to understand that there is a segment of our city that's being left behind, and we must do something about it. And that's why I'm excited about the work that we're doing in partnership with the Democracy Collaborative and looking and focusing on our most challenging neighborhoods and seeing what type of resources do we need to bring to bear to them where they live at in order to empower themselves to lift themselves out of poverty. Government for a long time has been creating program after program. And if you have a problem in Rochester, if you have a problem, we have a program that is set to fix it. But for some reason, there's a disconnect. We are program rich and results poor. And so we have just started to look at, I have a director of innovation and an innovation team that is doing a lot of research around poverty, the root causes of poverty, and how we as a community can truly change what's happening on a wide scale in our city. Going from being 11th in the nation to childhood poverty now to being second is something that is a number that I want to stop. I believe that the Anti-Poverty Initiative, the work that we're doing with the Democracy Collaborative will help us change that. So we're looking at worker-driven co-ops. We're working with our anchor institutions, our University of Rochester, RIT, Wegmans, our anchor institutions to figure out how do we create jobs in the neighborhood? How do we make sure that our neighbors and our citizens are empowered so that they can empower their families and develop a system where everyone in our community is able to participate in the economic recovery of Rochester. And we truly appreciate this opportunity to share some of the ideas that we have and to learn about what other cities are doing. We have done a lot of research on Cleveland and what they're doing with their market-driven co-ops and looking at what other cities, what the Bronx is doing around empowering workers and businesses that are in their neighborhoods that are coming there to actually hire from their community. And that's the type of work that we're doing in Rochester. And again,
Thank you. I'm going to stick with cities, and we'll save the biggest picture, the state, for last. So I would now ask Adolfo Wilson, who is the deputy mayor of Newark, another challenged city, to tell us what's going on there.
Well, thank you. I'm Adolfo Wilson. I am the deputy mayor and director of economic and housing development for the city of Newark. I would like to once again thank the sponsors, the foundation, Democracy Collaborative, and the students. Sort of coincidentally, when I came in here, I had 20 years ago, I did an externship. CUNY Law had an externship program. I was a student at Penn, and CUNY had like one of the sort of top community economic development externships. So I spent one semester here in the fall of 1996. And it was a great experience for me. It really allowed me, when I graduated the following year, to start in community development and not necessarily just start as a sort of just a new lawyer, but I had some experience walking into it. So I just want to encourage the students here to really take advantage of the clinics that are here. They are extraordinary and really help build a foundation for my career. One of the things that, as a director of economic housing development, there are several divisions that are in my department: economic development, our economic development corporation, property management, housing, planning, zoning, sustainability, real estate and finance, all within the department. And one of the things we try to do is really figure out ways to look at the structure of the economy within the city and looking at the different divisions and ways to maximize the integration of those. As you know, Newark is not too far from the city, about 300,000 people, and our main portions of the economy, so the anchors of the economy, are fundamentally transportation, the airport and the port, and the train station, the schools. There's 55,000 students in Newark. The real estate, finance, the fire, science, Prudential's is there, and arts, Prudential Arena, and healthcare to some degree. And so what we've been doing is really trying out ways to increase the worker opportunities and procurement in those spaces that are in the city within transportation. How do we get more people transportation jobs? How do we get, and within transportation, how do we get the transportation providers to bring more of their vendors to Newark? The same thing with the utility company, and same thing with education, Prudential. Not only that they buy local, but they also, that if they have someone they're doing a lot of business with, can they encourage that business to relocate to Newark, and then we provide them whatever incentives that we can provide so they can actually hire local people for those jobs. And that's something that we just launched. Our Mayor, Raj Baraka, is one of the things that he really felt was important, was having local people increase job opportunities for our local population. One of the other things that is sort of building on the economy is that we're really focused on our neighborhoods and building the commercial corridors and really our reentry population. Last year, we did this program called the Valentine's Day Sale. It was in February, obviously 14th, and we sold land $1,000 a lot for the first 100 people. We had about 1,000 people show up. We had lines around the corner. It was probably 15 degrees. People spent the night, and it's been a huge success. We decided that what would our neighborhoods look like if we didn't just think about rebuilding them with brick and mortar, but we built them with relationships, with love and compassion. What would happen if we sort of thought about our communities and neighborhoods that way, and that be the impetus, that people who care about each other were a part of the central portion of redeveloping our neighborhoods. One of the good takeaways from that is that it's been really successful, and there's a lot of support and there's a real desire for us to do it again. One of the challenges is that since we were selling lots and not buildings at the time, it was hard for people to get construction loans. It's much easier to get a mortgage, but somewhat of a challenge to get a construction ways of just sort of selling houses at discounted rates as opposed to selling lots, because the construction loan portion of it made it a real challenge. The other things that we're doing that I think is built on the Cleveland model are the co-ops. Laundry co-ops. We're doing co-ops throughout the city in different areas as part of the economic development strategy in these commercial corridors. Our agencies are working together, so you have health, police, fire, code enforcement, and economic development working together to either acquire land, tear down properties, shut down businesses, and then reactivate them with more community-oriented and resident-oriented facilities. And that's, we started off with one of the most challenged neighborhoods. It's a street called Stratford. Last summer, or 2 summers ago, someone had the bright idea that they would rob the weed spot. And someone decided that because the weed spot was being robbed, that they needed to call the police. And so someone called the police gets there, and in that, there's a tussle, and the police officer and the person who's robbing it both got shot. And so we all had to sort of come together to address it. It was on a commercial corridor. It was obviously an illegal business. It was a building that had a lot of code violations. And there was a lot of crime. And it was so rampant that someone thought that the police should stop someone from robbing the spot. And so what we've done is that we've taken over the building. On March 1st, all of the residents will be out of the building, and we're pouring in a ton of resources. And in that, we're doing a hydroponic farm. We have health department working in that, and it's mostly communities that are working the residents are working to fix the neighborhood. So in that, and I think my time is up, that I didn't see from over there, that I wanted to make sure that I sort of talked about it in that way, because I think that in a larger sense, there's multiple levels of strategy, and one is sort of looking at the infrastructure, the economy, making sure that you approach it that way, and then creating programs and policies that address the structure of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bay. I love the idea of the Valentine's Day sale. I mean, if that isn't family values, I don't know what is. For those who feared that Ras Baraka was this dangerous radical. I haven't heard a more convincing display of family values in a long time. Paul Soglin is the past, present, and probably future mayor of Madison, Wisconsin. In longevity and being in and out, the career, the only parallel I can think of is Jerry Brown. Before I go to Paul, I'm struck by one of the figures that was cited here earlier, that Madison, under Paul's leadership, has allotted $5 million to cooperatives, whereas New York started with 1.2, then went to 2 million. I want to point out that Madison, if I'm doing my math right, is about 1% the size of New York City. So a commitment of $5 million is not chopped liver. With that, let's hear from Paul Soglin, the mayor of Madison.
Thank you. We're a little more than 1%, and we're not that 1%. Let me start out with the notion of being progressive. We elect officials who are committed to marriage for every individual, to the person of their choice that they love. We're committed to choice. We're committed to a fair and equitable society. We're committed to proper immigration reform. We're committed to public education and unions. And the cities of this country are littered with the broken bodies and the broken buildings and streets that have been managed and administered by progressives. Our failure is to govern. And in the points I'm about to make, I would hope we could touch upon some of the things that need to be done in regards to making really great cities. The first that I wanted to cover, Marjorie Kelly addressed in her introduction. There has to be two critical elements for a great city. One is place, a sense of place, a space, whether it is a street corner, whether it is a beauty salon, a bookstore, a great European plaza, but there has to be a place, and it has to be a place that belongs to the people. And if you look at our cities, you will find in most instances that great places are tragically a function, at least great public places are tragically a function of wealth. The second element is social cohesion, and you cannot have social cohesion without economic integration, without equity, and without closing all of these gaps of disparity that plagues this nation. Those elements can only be built with trust and access. And I can't emphasize that without trust you cannot get access, and without access, I don't care how spacious, how clean, for example, in a health institution, but without access, people are not going to utilize it. Maslow had his hierarchy of needs. So here, instead of the number being 2, which was place and social cohesion, the number is 5. Without these 5, we cannot have functional family units, whether it's one person or it's 20. First, and it's appropriate that the term is housing first, comes housing. That's number 1. You can't do anything else without housing. Second is quality child care, and the rest of them, no particular order. The third is health care, which includes food, access to food. It includes mental health and dealing with the challenges of substance abuse. That is part of health care. And let me just say, we estimate in the city of Madison that perhaps 1/3 of our police and fire department budgets are dealing with the consequences of substance abuse and the challenges of mental health, which are issues that neither the police department nor the fire department originated. Transportation. Transportation is critical. If the jobs are in the suburbs and we live in the city and there's no access through transportation, we're wasting our time. And the fifth is the whole function of education, job training, and its relationship to not only economic opportunity, but the opportunity to access culture, which is one of the things that brings us to social cohesion. These are all the elements that will improve our 3 minutes? I'm not even a third of the way done. There's three essential elements to entrepreneurship. These are not the property of capitalists. They don't belong to Walmart, and they don't belong to the Koch brothers. One, you have to have a marketable idea or product. That should be obvious. Secondly, there has to be the ability to sell it. And third, there has to be the skills to manage, a complex organization. And that is something we, as progressives, have to master, whether we're talking cooperatives or whether we're talking our governments. A core idea to all of this is don't chase smokestacks. Whether it's the recent discovery of the Kauffman Foundation, which is the expert foundation on capitalism and entrepreneurship in this country, or it's our own experiences. Yes, if somebody wants to come and locate in your community, that's fine. But the real growth in terms of an economy and what keeps it local and what keeps the wealth within the community is developing it yourself. And let me just tell you that all the nerds you sat to next to in high school, which you always wondered what would become of them as they wondered the same of you, these are people with skills and talents that can contribute to the well-being of your community. You can't let Walmart, you can't let Home Depot bleed our cities and take the fruits of our labor elsewhere. Just that's a critical, essential element. Now, onto some of the quick points. Timing is critical. You can't necessarily do everything at the same time, and there has to be creations of foundations that we can go into later. Someone earlier mentioned risk-taking. There are going to be failures, and well, there should be. That is something that the bankers learned a long time ago. Not the bankers who did the subprime mortgages, but those who are willing to take risks. I want to share is, let me just say the words, Airbnb, Uber, and Lyft. If you don't understand what is wrong with them, you've got to go back and examine what you're missing in your education. Regulation is good. If it wasn't for regulation, all these farms, all the poor cities of this country would not have had electricity. They wouldn't have had landline telephones, which are unnecessary for most people in this room, but were essential for economic development in this nation 100 years ago. If it wasn't for regulation, we wouldn't be able to deal with the international spread of disease like Ebola and wiping out the childhood diseases that crippled so many, not just cities, but nations throughout the world. And we have to confront the fact that because Rand Paul says something about regulation, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And we have to answer that. Thanks.
To learn about how electricity came to the hinterlands, there's a great chapter in Robert Caro's Volume 1 of his biography of Lyndon Johnson describing how the Rural Electrification Administration under Franklin Roosevelt, with the help of the very young Lyndon Johnson, brought electricity to passage in what is obviously a remarkable book. All right, we move now to the state level. Carl Hastie is the relatively new Speaker of the New York Assembly, hails from the Bronx, and has been instrumental in the growth of some funding for worker co-ops in the city, and I gather has some thoughts about doing that at the state level as well. We're delighted to have you here, Speaker Hastie.
Thank you, Harold. Well, let me thank you for having me go forth. It means I have to try to do better than the three people who spoke before me. But let me also thank the Democracy Collaborative for inviting me back. I didn't realize, Carmen, it was 2 years ago when I first sat up here on the panel. And at that point, I was the chair of the Labor Committee in the Assembly, not knowing that less than 2 years later, I'd be the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, which, by the way, Harold, you mentioned come Wednesday will make it a year to the day that my colleagues gave me the privilege of being the Speaker of the New York State Assembly. So what does it all mean? It gives me the opportunity, I know that the press loves to say one of the three men in the room, but I feel like I'm one of the three people who sits at a table and I represent the desires of the Democratic colleagues of Assembly members around the state. And to have the ability to negotiate a $150 billion budget, which is the third largest budget in the country after the United States and California, is a tremendous opportunity. And for me, government should be about solving problems, and we should be looking to spend money in ways and create policy that solves problems. And I do believe that over the last decades, I think people's hearts and minds have been in the right place, but I think we have to start to look at things a little differently. And I'm so happy to hear, and we have presidential candidates, and the mayor of our city was speaking about, and I'm happy to hear that people are really starting to talk about income inequality. It's a problem that tears communities apart. I had the opportunity and actually when I was elected Speaker, I told all of my colleagues outside of the city of New York that I would visit each of their districts, and I spent time with lovely Warren and Rochester, seeing firsthand the things that she described to all of you. And one of the common things that I saw in every single upstate city or non-New York City that I visited was poverty. And it was, it doesn't matter whether it was Syracuse, whether it's Rochester, Utica, all of the upstate cities had a common thread. So again, so what do we do about these things in terms of poverty? There's many ways at fixing poverty. Believe in education. Last year we made record amounts of funding into education, and it's actually a discussion now around having community schools. My first conversation with the governor, we talked about the fact that most of the struggling schools around the state were in communities that had high incidences of poverty. And so that was an indicator to me and to many of my colleagues that you can't just solve the issue of child performance in schools just by what's going on in the classroom. There's many things that leads to why children struggle in school. And we also did record amounts of funding in higher education, the opportunity programs. And then finally, thirdly, one of the common things that we noticed that needs to be done in the Assembly, and I'm actually going to be releasing a report on my findings of my non-New York City tour, was that the job training should be in line with what the community is asking for. Far too many times, job training has just been a blanket thought and idea, but for whatever the local economy is, that's how the job training should be partnered with, particularly through community colleges. And I'd say lastly, when Carmen invited me to come to this, the idea of worker cooperatives, I'd say is another huge initiative that we can have that deals with income inequality. The idea that people will share the wealth, share decisions, and share in the assets of a business, not only does it help to tackle the issues of income inequality, it just makes people feel more vested. It's not just about a job. It's not just about fulfilling someone else's mission for you to help that company grow, but if you feel you're a vested part and you actually have to deal with the successes and potential failures, just makes a person more vested. And I'd say lastly for me, Harold, you were a little kind in saying that I guess, maybe half the money that the city of New York gets does come from the state, but we weren't directly involved in the funding on that. But I will say this, the opportunity that I have now to sit as the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, I think that we will look to put our money where our hearts are, and so we will look to see in this year's budget what we can do to help expand this idea of worker cooperatives throughout the state.
We're going to have a little discussion up here, and then we will turn to questions from you all. Paul, I don't think you actually, as you went through your talk rather quickly, actually got to the extraordinary commitment that Madison has made to co-ops. Can you talk about that for a couple of minutes?
Our first commitment was in 1978. We used some block grant money to fund union cab. And so that launched the first of our economic commitments to a worker-owned cab company or worker-owned company. Union Cab is still a viable, very viable and healthy participant, and proves the point that when you've got local ownership, it makes a difference in regards to what they do in terms of community values, which should not be overlooked. Now, we ran into a little budget problem this last year, and the initial commitment was dropped to $600,000 from $1 million, but we're already finding that the time it takes to think this thing out, it's not been that much of a setback. So what happened between 1978 and the initial commitment, the first year commitment of $600,000 now? Well, in that period of time, independent of the city, there's been a number of very viable workers' co-ops, which I think Alderwoman Kemble will talk about in her presentation in the next hour. But it's creating the mood, the atmosphere, the climate to nurture cooperatives. The credit unions have been invaluable in that regards. And not only the credit unions, but somebody mentioned Ann Reynolds and UW Extension in terms of the work that they do. I don't know that everybody's got that kind of access, but the one thing we've got besides the credit unions, which have got money, by the way, is we've got an educational institution with some really solid people who know about the administration and the management of cooperatives. So that led us into an era here where we've not only got Union Cab, but we've got these other worker-based cooperatives, which is a lesson unto itself. The educational work, again, you can't do everything at once. The educational work is very important. I'm not sure that the very first year that I'd introduced a big commitment in our budget would have gotten city council legislative support if in the prior 2 years we had not done a number of working conferences on cooperatives. And let me just say that as mayor, I attended portions of those, which then connected me to activities in the Twin Cities and other places, which then expands my own knowledge base. And the point I'm trying to make here is that there is a whole body of work out there which needs to be tapped into. So we've got a history going back to '78. We've now got an economic development department, and let me mention that also. Our economic development department, when I was first listening to it 5 years ago, was oriented as you'd expect it to be. Technology, biotech, things of that sort. I didn't see a lot of things that touch the lives of people in Allied Drive, which is a neighborhood of Madison, which is probably about 80% Latino, African American, and Asian, with some of our highest levels of poverty, where we now, by the way, have a very active co-op that's working towards a food model. But the point being, you've got to get your local economic development staff to fully buy in. It can't be all code and that sort of thing.
Okay. One of the cities I've written about a bit is New Haven, Connecticut, where a progressive city government actually leaned on the major employer in New Haven, which, not surprisingly, is Yale University, to really do community hiring for many of the service sector jobs at Yale. And this struck me sort of a subset of the whole idea of a community benefits agreement, which got cooked up in Los Angeles when I was fortunate enough to be the editor of the LA Weekly in the 1990s, that if public dollars are spent on a project, there's got to be a commitment by the developer and the people who'll be running that project thereafter for local hiring. So, Mayor Warren, lovely, you were talking about the University of Rochester, and in general, is there some move towards being able to get enough leverage to get some community-based hiring, some local hiring in what's going on in Rochester?
The University of Rochester is, combined with the hospital Strong, as the #1 employer in the city of Rochester, which changed because years ago it was the manufacturing base that were our #1 employers. And then you have the Rochester Regional Healthcare, which is another health agency, and then you have Wegmans. And so our industry has completely changed. And it's an exciting time for us because we recognize that for some that may be a limitation, but for us that's an opportunity. And so what we've been doing, the work that we've been doing with the Democracy Collaborative is actually looking at those anchor institutions and asking them to look at their procurement and what do they outsource? What do they purchase from outside of our community that could be built or purchased in our community by residents or made by residents that live in one of our most challenged neighborhoods? And so we are in the beginning stages of that particular program and looking in all of our, whether it's the University of Rochester, Rochester Regional Healthcare, RIT, or any of our manufacturers are all excited about working with the Democracy Collaborative because we believe that it is all of our problem in order to, that we are as great as our weakest link. That if we do not start to focus on poverty and the issues that are happening in our community, that it will overtake all the good that we have done. And so even though you might have industries that are being, that are new, that are growing, like photonics and optics and advanced manufacturing, there is a certain segment of our community that has been left behind because of a failed educational system. And we need to focus on that community in order to empower them to change and to affect change for our future residents of our city. And so when we look at places like New Haven, look at what Cleveland has done, one of the ways that they have done that is through these market-driven co-ops, and our institutions in Rochester are sitting at the table with us, eager to help us solve this issue. One of the things that I indicated earlier was about the anti-poverty initiative, and that anti-poverty initiative comes from the highest level of government, our state government, all the way down to our county, to our city, but also it's not just about government, it's about our community not-for-profits. It's about the people that are affected by poverty. It's about those that are providing the services to those individuals that are affected by poverty, all sitting around the table and saying, what do we need to do in government, in our work in not-for-profit, as the individual that's receiving the services, as the people that's given the services, to effectuate change in a way that is sustainable, a way that will change things for all of our residents and not just for the few. And so we're excited about those partnerships that we are developing there.
Thanks. Well, you look like you have something to say on this. So talk a little bit about hiring for all of those institutions that Newark, the sports facilities, the airport, et cetera, to the degree that you can leverage whatever you can leverage for get local hiring. But also talk a little bit about, I mean, the election of Ras Baraka really marked a political jump, I think it's fair to say, for Newark. And is there some spillover in the sort of political coalition that powered Ras Baraka into the mayor's office that then you can build on for the kind of economic development you're talking about?
Yes, I believe so. As you know, Rajay Baraka is the mayor of Newark. He's also the son of Amir Baraka, we ran a progressive sort of radical campaign. I remember during the inauguration, he said, "I'm a radical mayor," and so it gives at least me, in terms of economic housing development, a lot of room to to actually be able to sort of say this is what we want to do. And he's been really present and focused in terms of making sure that economic development happens in a way that's about the community, about the residents. There's a lot of ways that you can do community benefits agreements. I know we've been working with Rutgers because the institutions don't pay property taxes. I think if Rutgers paid property tax, they would pay $42 million a year. And so we work with them to, they came with a program where all the students who are admitted and their families make under $60,000 get free tuition. And so it was one of the ways to sort of address that. But the educational institutions, we've been really now working on the port. The port of New York, New Jersey, our portion of it, the airport, we most recently put out a request for expressions of interest to sell the port from under the Port Authority, partly because they just won't provide enough jobs. I think there's a walkout today from the ILA because of wages. And so what we've been doing really is trying to get the institutions, the anchor institutions, to either make sure that people are making a living wage, that there are jobs that are there for residents, and if neither are, and that they're also contracting with minority businesses and women-owned business. But if they're not going to do those, that they actually find another way to contribute. Another way to contribute, whether they put money into our affordable housing trust account, whether they provide funding for our job training programs. But there is an array of opportunities for institutions to participate, and what's mandatory is their participation.
Sounds like you've got a sequel to On the Waterfront there. Just curious, Paul, did you ever say, "I'm a radical mayor"? Did you ever say that?
I imagine I've said a lot of things like that over the years.
Okay. One question for Speaker Hasty, and actually for all of you. One of the limitations everyone here is aware of is cities don't really control their own funding, and there often is a dearth of regional entities that serve common purposes between cities and their suburbs. In fact, the raison d'etre for a lot of suburbs is, to get a line between themselves and the city, which is, I think, is a major problem in American life, actually. Anyone here want to just talk about, going to a higher level? Is there a higher level other than the state? How much have states paid enough attention to cities, and what have your experiences been, one way or the other, with dealing with what was referred to at the start of this afternoon as the reality zone outside your city limits?
Well, let me just speak from, I'd say, experience. One being, before I became Speaker, I was, a legislator from the Bronx, and although I cared about the rest of the state, my primary interest was promoting the welfare of the Bronx. But once I became Speaker, I now have to have 62 counties that I love. And what it has allowed me to do is to look at things from a statewide perspective. And as I've said in the state of New York, the people want the same thing no matter what parts of the state that you're from. They want an opportunity to take care of their families. They want to have their children to be educated, and they just want to have a safe place to live. But with that, there are regional differences, regional needs, and that's where I think the state tries to be helpful. The kind mayor mentioned how we were helpful with the property tax cap and limitations that local governments have on them. Because the ability to raise revenue is tied to inflation, or 2%, whichever is lower, has really kind of, I'd say, pushed the need for the state to be helpful to localities. And we tried to help the city of Rochester out, the assemblies. We had municipal funds that we like to give out to cities and municipalities to help them with infrastructure needs and new police cars and the like. So I think, and from my vantage point, I do feel the need particularly with the challenges that local governments feel, since there's more flexibility on the state level for us to be an added resource to the localities.
But mayors and deputy mayors, like your transportation systems and all of this, may start in the city and then they run off into jurisdictions over which you have no control, and that really shape the socioeconomic profile of your city in ways that which residents of the city, through their elected officials, can't control. So what have been your experiences, and what are the lessons, and what can you do? All mayors and deputy mayors, as you please.
Let me I mean, I've worked with Democratic governors, Republican governors, and the very exceptional situation we have in Wisconsin right now, with a governor and a good number of legislators who just hate government and hate cities, though I think they deny it. Our problem is we can solve these problems in Wisconsin, but the only tools they give us are the tools to crush unions and destroy jobs with living wages, which, by the way, is antithetical to our own philosophy, because we seem to find that if your kid is in school sitting next to a kid whose family's got a higher income, everybody benefits. I had a situation years ago where a group of employers came to me and said, would you mind scaling back the benefits and wages you're paying city employees, because they're setting the bar for the rest of us in the private sector? And I said, great. And let me just add one more thing along those lines, and this is not pandering, this is really true. Please give us a strong union. A strong union is the best thing in regards to labor management relations. And I would just say that given that we set those kind of standards in Madison over the last 30 years, and given that we've got all these folks trying to bring private businesses into the city with this higher wage scales that we're trying to establish, something's got to be working here. But what we don't have is we don't have the resources by ourselves to make the investment in a garage for our buses. And if you want a great public transit system, you have to have a garage. And if you want a great public transit system, you have to have the resources to buy buses. We don't have that. We collect a room tax. We use that room tax to create great spaces. We think that spending that money on great spaces is more important than spending it on TV ads to Chicagoans to come up to Madison as tourists. We think if you create a great place, people will come. In other words, it's having these resources that benefit beyond our boundaries. Right now in Madison, we have a performing arts center that costs a couple of $1 million a year out of public money, not to mention the private money. It's a regional facility. We want to go to a regional transit operation, and we can't do that without state legislation. Our hands are tied in terms of tax revenues. In a heartbeat, I'd raise taxes. I'd raise at least a ½ cent and commit it to public transit, and I'd take another ½ cent and I'd commit it and give it to the school district to focus on pre-K education. We can tolerate a 1% increase like that, but we don't have the authority. Those are some of the challenges we've got in Madison. In Wisconsin, it varies. There's 19 of our states that are really mangled by regressive legislatures that pass bills at a moment's notice when AT&T says jump, when Uber says jump, and then fortunately at least there's another 30 state legislatures, including here in New York, where you've got people who know how to think.
Mayor Warren, what's the regional setup in Rochester between you and your surrounding areas?
So, Harold, you have the Speaker of the New York State Assembly here who I have to get money from, so I'm going to tell you. And
She
it's
didn't
budget
pay
time
me
right
to
now,
ask
so
that
he's going to be
question.
going in the room soon, and I want Rochester to be at the top of his list of cities to take care of. But, we have, over the last couple years, in partnership with our county government and our state government, really, they have really started to look at Rochester and focus on our city and focus on our challenges. And when you talk about issues with transportation, that's a major issue for us, but the transportation is centrally located in the city, but the jobs are actually outside of the city. And so, and when we look at some of our most challenged neighborhoods and we look at the jobs that are located in those neighborhoods, many of the people that live there, 90% of them do not work in those jobs. And so we're looking at what are the issues around transportation? What are the barriers to people that live in our neighborhoods being able to access those jobs that are in their neighborhood, but also being bused or having public transportation to those other areas. And so we're working with our Rochester Regional Transportation Center to say, are there shuttles that we can provide? Are there employers that's willing to pay to support a shuttle for those employees that are in our communities that need that support? We're looking at what training. I believe the speaker just talked about not just doing blanket workforce development training. One of the things that happened and that we noticed probably about a year and a half ago when we talked to our manufacturers, they talked about the fact that, yes, the city will provide us money to buy new equipment, to buy that new machine. However, I don't have anyone to run that machine because we have we don't have enough people that have enough knowledge in advanced manufacturing. And so we need help to actually train individual workers to work these particular jobs of the future. And that's going to take the city and government working together to say, what types of training programs do you need? So we started a program in Rochester called AMTEP, which is an advanced manufacturing training employment program with that have been previously incarcerated or those that are in our most challenged neighborhoods to a 90-day training program. And it has been very, very successful, and our employers are hiring them, and these are living wage jobs. We have programs such as project labor agreements where we are working with our unions to ensure that local labor are working on public works jobs. Things that the city is funding or the state is giving us dollars to fund or the federal government that local labor is working on them. And we also work with our community benefits agreement as well. But I think that for us, all eyes are on Rochester when it comes to poverty and fixing poverty, because our problem is so concentrated, because you can actually draw a crescent moon around it, because everything that happens there, whether you're talking around education or crime or economic opportunity, we know where the people are, and we really know, as the mayor said, you know how to fix this. It's just a matter of having the will to do it. And right now, I believe that as a state and as a local government, in conjunction with the county, we have the will to do it now.
I think we're at that moment where we will start taking questions from you all. Is there someone going around with a mic, or how is this working? There's a mic there. Okay, well, let's see. How do we do this?
So, for the purpose of the quality of the audio for the video, we're not going to use the mics that are right in front of you where you're seated. We are going to have a mic over at the left corner of the room, and if you can line up about 6 feet behind the videographer, that would be great. If you cannot, if you would prefer for me to come to you, I will. Just signal me. I'll be over there, and I'll look out in the audience as well.
All right, well, the videographer is right there. We do not have a tape measure to, decide what exactly 6 feet is, but, we'll just wing it. Okay. First question, and if let us know if you're directing the question to a particular person up here or just generally.
Hi, my name is Thomas Lopez Pierre, and for disclosure purposes, I'm a candidate for City Council in Upper Manhattan.
Uh-huh.
The question is for the two municipal panelists. In New York City, our procurement is about $16 billion, and we spend less than 0.5% on black-owned companies. And so we hear cities, and this city in general, talk about Black Lives Matters. So I was wondering, without being critical of New York City, could you tell me in your cities how much money you spend on procurement with Black and Hispanic-owned companies? Thank you. Oh, and one last thing. If I get elected to the City Council, God willing, you can count on my support financially for this organization. Thank you.
All right, let me, you want to go?
So in the city of Rochester, for all of our projects, we have a requirement that 15% be spent on minority and women-owned businesses, especially when it comes down to construction. We have started to also require not just with businesses, but also with workforce as well. That we noticed that that we may require, that there are requirements when it comes down to businesses, but when you talk about actual people working on the jobs, that there was an issue with that as well. And so we are empowering our we have a neighborhood and business development and MWBEE officer that works with the city, that works directly not only with the unions, but also with our contractors to make sure that they comply with our regulations. I do know that the governor has also proposed that the state requirements also be imposed on cities as well, and we would welcome that. There was a Supreme Court case a number of years ago that looked at not cities not being able to, or municipalities not necessarily being able to enforce these quotas without there being a disparity study. And we did a disparity study back in the late 19 numbers are based on that disparity study and not on a new one.
I'm glad you went first, because where I want to start with is the disparity study. And you better check to see whether or not New York City has done a disparity study. We did the same thing. We're all suffering the consequences of the Supreme Court when they gutted affirmative action, and not just in terms of quotas. Many of us were simply operating on goals. And the bottom line is this: you can't trigger numbers in terms of requirements that are higher than, and this is very critical, that is higher than the percentage of African American, Latino, Asian-owned businesses, not the population. That's what the Supreme Court has done to us. So consequently, you can have a city like Madison where, well, between all groups, we got 30% African American, Latino, and Asian as a population, but the businesses owned by those three ethnic racial groups is less than 1.5%. And so we're awarding contracts to more than that. So what do you do at that juncture? Because that is what's going to be the situation in most cities, that the disparity study will show that the number of businesses owned are significantly lower than the population. So what you've got to do is two things. One is you have to use the power of persuasion. You have to go to the contractors, those who are going to get these contracts from government, and persuade them as to what is the right thing to do. And then the second thing you have to do goes back to that question of economic development policy, which is the encouragement and the creation of these businesses. And let me just point out, if you want to have a subcontractor who is a plumber who owns a plumbing company, you're not going to have someone owning a plumbing company unless you've got a qualified plumber. So you've then got to go drill down even deeper and get into the trades and get into the kinds of businesses that create the skill and create the wealth that then leads to companies that can go out and bid.
Okay, another reason to hate the Supreme Court. We got a lot of people lined up there, and we're going to go a little past 3, but maybe we should try to keep the answers a little shorter, substantive though they be. Next question.
Redwood with the Consumer Health Foundation in Washington, D.C. This question is for Deputy Mayor Adolfo Wilson. Am I saying that right? Deputy Mayor, I'm very appreciative of the kind of creativity that you are using to do the economic development work in Newark. I'm wondering if you could talk about any equity criteria that you applied to the Valentine's sale. So, for example, if you buy this property and you have a business on it, you have to hire locally or hire people who've been incarcerated. Or if you build a home, you can't sell it for a certain amount of money to preserve affordability. Just any criteria you apply to that project or thinking about it.
The only requirement really was that the couple be in a relationship and that they both sign the deed. We were really thinking about it more about the relationship than sort of the equity component of it. That they're required to own it for 5 or 10 years, and then if they sell it before then, there's a split on the net profits of it. But other than that, that was sort of the main criteria. As we move forward, though, on our construction projects, we came in, we amended our project labor agreement as well as our zoning ordinance for tax abatements, and we require 51% of the laborers be from Newark, 51% minority or women-owned businesses, and 30% Newark businesses.
Yes, next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Burnham, and I'm the lead community organizer at Banana Kelly, and so I do tenant organizing in the Southeast Bronx. So all of this sounds great, right? In the Southeast Bronx, we're the poorest congressional district in the nation. We have highest rates of incarceration, a litany of public health failures. And Harold, when you were saying you see the trees going up, how do we get the trees to move back? I know my residents, when they see the trees go up, they get scared. And I wanted to know how you all reconcile the two worlds that we are living in, where we have extreme vulnerability, and then we're going up against a well-oiled capitalist development arena that comes into communities and can plow over them before we even get a chance to do any of these great things that we're talking about, because we are strapped with, whether it be government bureaucracy, lack of funding, or the other litany of things that come with being in a vulnerable community. So how do you reconcile those two worlds?
Well, let me touch on that since I do represent the Bronx. I've always looked at particular communities in the Bronx as you want to make sure that you have I'd say mixed populations that are there, because I think one of the mistakes that have been made, I think people's hearts were in the right place when it came to the South Bronx, but one of the things you don't want to do is just designate a neighborhood where only poor people could live there. I think you really want to get to a place where you should have mixed income housing, because if you only have housing that's really there for people with low incomes, if you have a young person who goes away to college and becomes very successful, you really don't give them a means to come back. So I've always thought that we should be looking at it, from all ways, that parts of the South Bronx, yes, we should have affordable housing, but you also don't want to just designate neighborhoods to be purely just for poor people. And that's one of the challenges that's happening now in the South Bronx.
In Saul Alinsky. So government has got to start out with the premise that you never do anything for people that they can do for themselves. So then that gets us to what is the role of government. One thing I'd suggest, and maybe you've been there already, is to read John McKnight, who was heavily influenced by Alinsky and some of the work he's recommended. That in turn led to Matt, and you put them on a neighborhood-based assignment. Now, we don't have anybody doing this full-time, but we pull them out, and it'll include police officers, public health nurses, bus drivers, city engineers, building inspectors, and the usual suspects from housing, from civil rights, and so on. And they are focused on the neighborhoods, and it's all embedded in their name. Neighborhood resource to the
in our neighborhoods, and especially our challenged neighborhoods, what we know and from talking to our residents is that they don't want to leave their neighborhood. They want to stay there, but they want us to make the investment to make their neighborhood better. And that's what I believe that our job as government and as a city is to do, is to look at those commercial corridors in their neighborhoods, to look at those houses in those neighborhoods that need to be renovated or demolished and take them down, to deal with the open air drug markets that are happening in neighborhoods, and to make the investment in the neighborhoods that the residents that have lived there and are invested in those neighborhoods to make it better for them. And so it's not about moving people out, it's about lifting people up for us. And so this year really going to be focused on our commercial corridors, but we have been focused on talking to our residents. What is it that they want to see? What type of businesses do they want to have in their neighborhood, and trying to get that to happen for them, because I believe that many people, especially our senior citizens that have invested and paid the taxes there, have seen their neighborhood change over a period of time, and are looking for it to change back to what they knew it to be. And so I think that as our city starts to improve, that we talk to our neighbors, but we also make the strategic investments that they want to see, and not what necessarily what the city wants to see.
Okay, next.
My name is Fran Corton. I'm the publisher of Yes Magazine, and I have a question for the Speaker of the Assembly. So you have mentioned education and worker co-ops, kind of key elements of your community wealth building support. And my question is regarding the procurement strategies with anchor institutions. So it seems like one of the key elements of the community wealth building approach is making use of the fact you have hospitals and educational institutions that are rooted in place and often do not have much relationship with the local people and the businesses that they might be able to draw on. Does the state have any role in encouraging that kind of procurement?
Yes, but it can be better. For instance, even the mayor mentioned that the governor in his proposed budget, since the state has its goals that it likes to have, the governor likes to point out that he has a goal of 30% MWBE. He actually wrote into his budget language that he'd like to see the locals do that. But we can also have many of the CUNY and CUNY and others, we can encourage them to have the MWBE goals as well. So I was encouraged by the governor's wanting to have even local governments have that. And if that's the case, then to me, every place that state government touches, we should have those same requirements as well.
Next question.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Davita Davison, and I find my comment very fitting because we are at a conference, at a gathering that is sponsored by Democracy Collaborative. And I just came here to let everyone know that democracy is under attack in this country. I come here from Detroit, Michigan. I am the director of a nonprofit in Detroit, and my question is for Mayor Paul. In the city of Detroit, or in the state of Michigan, cities are being used as tools to advance what we call in Michigan the emergency management system. Currently, right now in the state of Michigan, black and brown cities from Detroit to Flint to Saginaw to Benton Harbor to Muskegon are all under emergency manager. This may not be happening here in New York, but if Detroit or Flint or any of the cities in the state of Michigan serves as the canary in the coal mine, I'm here to tell you the democracy is under attack. My question is, what are we doing on the ground in cities so that we can be made aware of not only the importance of cities, because they are, but how we can fight back against the empire that is trying to take democracy away from us, one city, one state at a time?
Couple of things. And let me preface by saying I've been to Detroit 3 times in the last year and 2 years. And the first time I came out of Detroit, and I was not here thinking of the emergency government, but I made comments to people who kind of raised eyebrows and said, having been to Detroit, that if I was 30 years old and I was looking for a glorious new frontier to start a career, I would go to Detroit. I think that the opportunities and the possibilities in Detroit are just endless. And now that we've gone and pretty much mangled this country from east to west as we moved over the last 2 centuries, Detroit is the future. You are absolutely correct in terms of the very first point that I made when we started a couple hours ago, which is it's one thing to have progressive leadership and all the right politically correct statements, but we've got to elect people who implement a progressive agenda on everything from economic issues to what creates that social cohesion, that what addresses that equity. And that's really our only defense against what's going on in Michigan, what happened in Bell, California, and all these other communities where the actions of a handful of people basically, I mean, this is supposed to be the United States of America. This is not something run by the Politburo.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Adolfo Wilson, you told me you actually need to leave right at 3, which it is now, but we're going to, is that correct?
Yeah, but I have a...
Sure.
I have a hard stop. I do want to sort of address the question, partly because it's not just in Michigan. I mean, in Newark and in New Jersey as well, they don't call it emergency management systems, but it's state supervision. And so what it does is it takes away control, local control from the approving of anything around the budget. Any of the spending has to, at least in our situation, get state approval. So whether or not it's for a fire hydrant, have the infrastructures, and that, and as someone always says, not building any more land. And so in that regard, the desire for these cities to become central, someone wants to, folks want to control that, and also ensure that that control is done in a way that benefits them. What we've been doing is being really aggressive in terms of raising funding so that we wouldn't be under state supervision. So even when we submit those ideas of funding to the state, it's been interesting because most of the time they don't ask finance questions, they ask political questions. And so I'm like, all right, no one's not even counting the numbers here. And so we've been continuously pushing because our goal is not to come in with state supervision. We came in with a $93 million budget deficit. We balanced it last year, and that was a year and a half. And I think we should have a surplus in 2016 because we've been consistently raising funding. But even in that, I've also noticed that now that we're at the point where we don't necessarily need state supervision, the state's like, all right, how did you do that? Like, you're serious? You actually raised all the money? And so I think it's the commitment and determination that it really takes, and that these fronts are they're not isolated. They're all over. And I think they're going to be more and more as these cities continue to change. So, yeah, I'm sorry. When I came in today, the mayor was supposed to be here. I'm sort of pinch hitting for him today, but I have to go see my own children today, so I have to go fly to see my daughter. So I really appreciate the opportunity and time and this event, and look forward to participating hopefully next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. But we have a few more minutes we can go up here. I would point out that the cities that the Michigan governor has taken over are almost exclusively minority dominated in terms of the demographics, and I think the southernization of the Republican Party is one of the many things we really need to watch out for. Okay, next question.
Hi, my name's Abby Scher. I'm a sociologist and journalist. I write. Two things that we haven't talked about that much here that I'm really interested in is the challenge of financing. We have a financial system that doesn't operate for the benefit of any of the cooperative or local businesses, even small businesses. The financial system is not working toward. We mentioned credit unions, but there's also I know in New York State, wrestling with Empire State Development Corporation, funds within New York City. I mean, there are, it's a whole other arena of struggle, and I'm interested at the city and state level of what the role of government is in that.
Can you ask your question to be a little more specific? I'm not sure what your question is.
How do you help finance local and the cooperative businesses, both startup money, but also continuing loans and wrestle with the financial system? I mean, the $600,000 from the city of Madison or $2.1 million from New York City is all well and good, but it's actually a drop in the bucket when you're really talking about business investment.
Well, if you're just talking about cooperatives, as I said, the funding has pretty much come from the city, and I'm saying here that I think we will take a look at it through this budget cycle on the state level. I'll be the first to admit probably enough has not been invested in this, but we're going to start to look at that on the state level.
Very quickly, let me just suggest that maybe with your question in the previous discussion about mission, he has shrunk government so small that he can drown it in a bathtub with lead-poisoned water for the children of the community. The bottom line is we have to raise taxes. We have to raise taxes. There are three functions of government. Ted Lowy's article in Political Science Journal or something back in the 1960s, LOWEI, I think. And he makes the point in his book review, there are three functions of government. One is regulation, that is good. One is distribution of services, that is good. We all saw that last week here in terms of plowing the snow. And the third is also good, maybe even better, and that is redistribution, which is a function of government. And if you don't understand that redistribution of wealth is what created the economic viability of the South and Southwest, just go look at who paid for the construction of highways and roads as part of the National Defense Act during the Eisenhower years, and all of us in the Midwest and in the Northeast, we paid the tax bills that paved the roads, not just to our own suburbs, which helped to undermine our cities, but throughout the South, throughout the Southwest and California. And as we discussed at lunch, it was that federal money that went into the defense industry after World War II that created all the wealth in Texas and the wealth in California. Redistribution is as old in American as mother pie, only now that a certain political group has got the wealth and they're in the 1%, they don't want any more redistribution.
Let me just add that there is some folks on the Philadelphia City Council who are advancing an ordinance to establish a municipal public bank. I don't think we have any municipal public banks. We have one state bank in North Dakota, the legacy of the progressive era. That might be another alternative into in terms of funding the kind of projects we're talking about here. Can someone here advise me on time?
Woods, and I run Study My City, which is a grassroots technology support for economic development. I really don't have a question, so I'll save you a little bit of time in answering. But I have an exclamation point on Mayor Soglin and the idea of Lyft and Uber and Airbnb and what they are doing to communities, and the fact that they're really just the tip of the iceberg, and that they're technology-driven solutions because they can be. And you've seen your cities depopulated their manufacturing base. Companies no longer own their real estate. They don't own their technology centers. They don't own their distribution plants. The next thing that's going to happen is they won't own their employees. And what this is, the largest socioeconomic challenge that cities are facing today, and it's unaddressed. It's going to happen incredibly quickly. Airbnb and Uber took out their adversaries in 2 years. Every single large corporation or organization in the country is looking to get rid of their employees and turn them into 1099s.
Offering to do it to government. They're offering to come in and take over.
University, government, whatever. It's an economic decision, but it's one that's going to happen so incredibly quickly, and it's happening right now, that is really going to be the biggest challenge, I think, that we're all going to have to face in the next 2 years.
Next question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Eugenia Kim. I'm an undergrad at NYU, and I previously worked for the Roosevelt Institute. I was just wondering, how do you get anchor institutions, particularly ones where the leadership at those anchor institutions are unwilling to embrace their anchor mission, to the table and to cooperate with cities?
The hospitals are a perfect example, and somebody mentioned them earlier. And I would suggest studying what happened in Boston under the leadership of Mayor Menino, who, as I came back into office 5 years ago, I wanted to see what the best practices were around the country. And every time when I looked at food, when I looked at all sorts of things, it kept on going back to Boston and Mayor Menino's administration. I don't want to create any more headaches for mayors, but certainly one of the aspects of it is leadership from the top. There's just no question that when key city officials go to these institutions, but their effectiveness is limited to the participation of the constituency. So in other words, if you're talking about the role of a hospital in involvement in building community, it's got to include the patient base, which can be reached through insurance and all the various prepaid medical plans. It can also be reached through the staff, as well as the obvious, which is the board of directors. But hospitals, critical employers, construction companies, they are all to be on the list. A lot of this can be done with government regulation, but one of the things we miss is the discussion, particularly for business. Now I'm going to get going on this, particularly for businesses that have a retail presence. One of the things we've learned in our research is that businesses with a retail presence, food processors and people who've got a label of things that you eat, financial institutions, insurance and healthcare institutions, there's not a lot of them out there that are stepping out in these areas. But the ones who are vulnerable to their market, to the people like you and I who shop with them, they're beginning to get those messages, and they are susceptible to that kind of pressure.
How many more people do we have in line? Wait, 3? 2? 3. Given the time constraint, maybe can we just have the 3 people all state their questions in succession, and then we'll have one wrap-up answer here.
Sure. I'm Frank Llewellyn from Democratic Socialists of America, and I wanted wanted you to address the question of scaling these programs. Really, you're talking. This is really an alternate economic development model that is really not part of the larger economic development theme that we hear from most candidates running for office. And we have to change that, and so I'd like to see how you address that.
Okay. Next.
Hi, I'm Abigail Savage. I'm a reporter for Yes Magazine, and I wanted to ask how the relationship between unions and union-led movements like the SEIU $15 an hour wage connects with the community wealth building strategy. Are there ways that what are the ways that you're seeing unions interact with the two things intersect?
Okay, and
Justin Woods from the Land Use Law Center for Sustainable Development at Pace Law School. Mr. Speaker, it's great to see somebody in your position at a conference like this, because New York State needs a more creative economic development policy than locking up black and brown men from New York City to give upstate white guys jobs and tax breaks. My question is the mayor referred to state legislation that we need to advance cities. The one, as you took your tour across New York State, I'm sure outside of every hollow city, you saw sprawling suburbs, malls, and our land use policy doesn't support building strong cities. Whether you're talking about Rochester, Syracuse, or Binghamton, right outside the city's edge, we have wealthy suburbs and strip malls and shopping malls that don't support our city centers. So I'm curious what ideas you have at the state level you can implement to reform that. Thank you.
I'm told, by the way, that a specific part of the next panel is going to be dealing with the interaction between unions and cooperatives, so maybe we can hold that in the interest of time. For now, just stick around for the next panel, but let's have some folks closing by addressing the remaining questions.
So since you said you'll hold off on point 2, so I'll leave that. The mayor here mentioned that before, that the development of suburbs have sometimes hurt the cities. And I even noticed in some upstate cities, many of the employees, even the municipal employees, actually don't even live in the cities. They live in the suburbs. That is something that happens here in New York City as well. So I don't know if I have an answer for that, but I do want to tell you that that has been an issue that even I think the City Council of Syracuse, when I visited Syracuse, was asking for state legislation to help them in this challenge, because they felt like the municipal dollars was really being encouraged to be spent in the suburbs. So it is one of the challenges that I noticed on the upstate tour. So I can't give you an answer yet, but it is on one of the list of the things that we do have to resolve, since it appears that many people do come into the cities to work, but then return home in the evening and spend their dollars in the suburbs. So it's more of an acknowledgement of the point that you made. And then the scaling of programs, again, I think that this is very early. I said that this was one of the ways that I think that we could look at dealing with income inequality, and I had skipped over my own notes that, you know, we're talking about raising the minimum wage here in the state of New York. The New York State Assembly, we actually passed a bill on that last year, and I'm happy that the governor's now joined us on that. But I think it's one of the many ways that we could look to deal with income disparities here in the state.
Two final thoughts. One, land use, transportation policy, and tax policy are intertwined. And every time a project, a development is examined, it has to be examined as to how those three are related. That is absolutely critical. The second thing is and there's a few people here old enough to have read Chairman Mao's Little Red Book. You'll recall whoever controls the countryside controls the cities. Whoever controls the sewers controls everything. Do not let control of your local water go private.
I would just say the investment for us to bring this scale is really through our foundations and working in partnership with private industry and along with cities. And so for our worker cooperatives that we're looking to do is in partnership with the private industry as well as with our foundations. I just wanted to comment on the young lady from Michigan and what she said. And I don't want us to forget the power of the vote. I was watching MSNBC a few days ago, and they were talking about what happened in Flint, Michigan, and one of the commentators talked about this happened, and the commentator said, well, it can happen because, you know, the people that are elected in an office don't care because people don't vote. And I say to each of us that we have to empower our residents and we have to work with them to understand that the power is in their hands. We live in a country where it's one man, one vote. And we have become, you know, many people that are disenfranchised, they have felt that their vote doesn't matter anymore. And I think that we have to let them know that it does matter, and that when situations like this arise, that they have the power to take these individuals that are not putting their issues at the forefront out, and they need to do that.
and they cannot allow them to continue to be in power. And that's really in this election season. And we see what's happening in this country around this election, that our folks that understand the issues of people that live in our cities, don't care about their issues, that want to keep them incarcerated, that want to keep them impoverished, that they have the power to vote them out or to not vote for them at all. But they have to get out and they have to go and vote. And it has to be a united front. And so I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that the people of this country have the ability to change what's happening if they pay attention and if they get out and vote.
Okay. Two things, since we're running a little behind on schedule. I'm told that the break, which is about to start, will last not for 15 minutes, but for 10 minutes. Second thing, please let us thank this terrific panel, our speaker, our mayors, and you.
basically Wolf Hall meets Sherlock.
Okay.
So it's a fabulously well-written, really in-depth historical basis. The detective is a hunchback in Tudor England.
All right, so it's
C.J. Sansom, S-A-N-S-O-M.
Okay.
And the first of the series is the Dissolution of the Monasteries.
All right. Okay.
And you can never guess the end.
All right, well, don't tell me.
I'm not going to.
Kick your ass.
But that's the most important thing, is you can't figure out who did it.
All right, well, I love
like,
that.
Yeah, just the turn.
I mean, yeah, I have to read a book every night to turn my mind off.
Same here.
Yeah, my mind just keeps going. My husband goes crazy. The light goes on, and I'm writing ideas down.
Have you, is it just mysteries, or do you want another recommendation?
I just read mysteries.
Oh.
Very narrow.
This is kind of a mystery, but it's not. It's all the light we cannot see.
I'll look at it, but I will tell you that I'm pretty picky. I only read
Okay.
mysteries.
Okay. This is gorgeous. And
All the light
we cannot see.
All right.
So who are you reading now, and who would you recommend? 'Cause I'm looking to you to.
Well, I just
'cause
got.
I've just finished all of those books.
I just got done reading one of Kathy Wright's books.
Oh, the-
Somehow I Bones. So I just got done reading that, and I don't have my thing here with that. But I went up to, there's a bookstore in, I do read Nora.
Nora.
Robb is it Nora Robb or J.D. Robb?
That's it.
Her Other Identity. And the book about, it's futuristic and it's Eve Eve Dallas is the character. And it's like it's set in the future, and she's like a policewoman.
Oh, God, that does sound good.
Oh,
Science
there's
fiction
like about
meets
70
mystery.
of them.
Oh, good. That's good. So they can go on for ages.
Yeah, and they're quick reads.
Right, good.
And it's always, so
Right.
just a little bit of like,
Right.
meets boy interaction in there that always makes it a little
J.D.
spicy
Robb,
for me.
okay.
Oh, great, good.
And Ian Rankin has revived Rebus. He brought him out of retirement. His latest book is Detective.
I'll have to check that out. That's a common name for me.
If you could take your seats, we'll be starting in about 2 or 3 minutes, our second panel.
It's like the world's largest.
Thank you.
And I just wanted mysteries. I don't have that one. I came up
Okay,
with a
I'll
whole thing
get
of
that.
books.
But there's also the British British Library just reissued all of these detective books written in the 20s and 30s that had gone out of print, and everybody's raving about what a good read they are.
British Library? Okay.
Yes, the British Library. It's their mystery series.
If I could ask for our second panel to come up, and we're going to begin in a couple minutes.
Well, we are. Of course we are. Well, it was good seeing you.
It's lovely. I look forward to it.
If everyone could take your seats, please, so we could begin.
Roger, I've been trying to find you. Hey, Mike.
Okay. Could I ask if everyone could please take your seats? Maybe Democracy Collaborative staff, could you assist them? David Zuckerman. Whoever's doing that, that's great.
Everyone could take their seats. If you could
Please take your seats so we could begin. Great, thank you so much. I know people will be straggling in, but since I'm doing the setup comments and you're really here to hear these good people, I'll begin. My name's Ted Howard. I'm the president of the Democracy Collaborative. Thank you all so much for being here and being so fully engaged. I think you're really going to enjoy this next panel. At the outset of the day, my colleague Marjorie Kelly, co-author of the paper Cities Building Community Wealth, talked about the drivers of community wealth building, and I just wanted to quickly reiterate those as the framework for this panel. Among these key drivers are first, economic development that encourages local and broad-based ownership. We've heard a lot about cooperatives, but there are social enterprises, there are land trusts, there are employee-owned companies of various kinds. We'll be hearing about some of that. Second, community wealth building focuses on place, equity, and inclusion, rather than think that we can just develop a large regional economy and the benefits of that will trickle down to those most in need. Community wealth building focuses intentionally on those who've been excluded from the economy and how to move them into productive work. Third, community wealth building focuses on preventing leakage of money from our cities. In many of our cities, our large place-based anchor institutions are spending billions of dollars every year on goods and services, but a great proportion of that, very often the great majority, is being spent out of the city. And all that money leaves our areas, so we get no multiplier effect. Third, leveraging existing assets that we have. Instead of smokestack chasing, as was referred to here, leveraging the assets in our communities, for instance, like value out of them. And third, promoting partnerships in community and economic development. That it's not simply a partnership between the municipal government and business, but a partnership of all the key stakeholders, including local philanthropy and community-based organizations and universities and hospitals. And really, that's the theme of this panel. Development in the city government, of philanthropy, of cooperative development, of community-based organizations in the community building space. And really, all of our panelists, and I've had the opportunity to work with most on this panel, are really at the cutting edge of this growing movement of community wealth building as it's being played out in cities around the country. So I'll introduce our panel very quickly, and then we're just going to speak in this order, from my left, your right. Is that right? Whatever, it's going that way, okay? Math and spatial relations were never my strong point in school. So my dear friend, Tracy Nichols, our Director of Economic Development in the city of Cleveland, where I live, will speak first. And I've challenged her to see how many sort of 1960s era third world radical leaders can she cite, and see if she could do a better job than Paul Soglin. Second, Patrick Horvath, who is with the Denver Foundation and has really helped steer that foundation toward extraordinary new kinds of investments in the community. They're very cutting edge. After Patrick is Elena Gorder, who is with Nexus Community Partners, a really extraordinary community building organization and intermediary in the city of St. Paul that has recently begun and made a pivot and really begun their own community wealth initiative in that city. Then Rebecca Kimball, who is with the City Council, the President of City Council of in Madison, Wisconsin, and also the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. So we've heard a lot about worker co-ops. She's one of the people who knows about as much as you can possibly know. And then batting cleanup is Roger Green, who's the Executive Director of the Du Bois Bunch Center for Public Policy and a distinguished lecturer with the Medgar Evers College of CUNY here in New York. And so I'd like to begin with Tracy Nichols. And take it away, Trace.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here today. I started my career, I got a job at the City of Cleveland in community development when I was 19 years old because it paid more than my work-study job at college. And I had no idea that I would really become so much of a calling for me, what government work would be. And I truly believe that being a public servant is probably one of the most rewarding things that you can do. So, but I was young. I left to work for a CPA firm. After all, that was what I was studying, accounting and finance. So I figured I had to go work for a CPA firm. I hated it. But one of the things I landed there was the ability to teach Job Training Partnership Act. And so I was training welfare to work, basically women, who were looking for a way to get into the workforce and get off of welfare. And I learned a lot there. I learned the importance of a job to an individual, a good paying job. And I also learned that people were deathly afraid of failing. It was really remarkable to me, so much so that I had to redo the whole course so I would have a fake test before the real test so that they could get over kind of that fear before they took the real test. I got involved then in placement. I asked my boss if they would let me get involved with that because I felt that I could be more effective than the individuals who were doing it. And I really started being able to get people into these jobs. I had people who still call me who years ago, it was a lot of years ago, who I had helped. But I decided the CPA firm was not for me, and I had an opportunity to go work for our local county, and I was the first economic development officer. I said, great, here's an opportunity to actually create jobs. This is what I can do. It's better than just, helping somebody with the social service program. I'm going to create real jobs, make real change in my community. I was excited about it. And the one thing about being around a long time, I'm 33 years in government, is you're there, you give an incentive, and I thought it was really smart because I said I'm going to measure the return on investment. I said, makes great sense, I'm going to do this deal. You give a tax incentive. 10 years later, the company picks up and moves, and they go somewhere else, and because they got another incentive. And sometimes they moved further out. And a lot of the people that I was so happy that I helped get a job, suddenly they couldn't get to that job. They lost their job. I felt kind of bad because, when you're helping people get that job, you're so excited and you see them at the grand opening and they're all happy starting the job. And you think about them and say, wow, that's horrible. So I left the county. I went over to the city because I really felt that I could help more at the city. It was more hands-on, and so I got the job there, and I heard about these cooperatives, and someone said, hey, we got these cooperatives, it's a great thing. So I told my staff, hey, call them up and see if they need some funding. And they had just been turned down, apparently, for bank funding, and I had never worked with a foundation. They had no idea who I was. I didn't know them. And so we got together, we funded the first one and all the subsequent ones, but we developed this partnership that was incredible. And for me, this has been the greatest thing in my career because I now work with foundations, my anchor partners, my other government entities in the area, and we sit around and we brainstorm, we figure out how can we do these economic inclusion projects? How can we have more social impact? What can we do? And what I found my specialty is that I really understand every federal program there is on God's earth, and I can figure out how to tweak it to work to do the things we want to do. I hold the highest 3 waivers of public benefit in the country for HUD. By just explaining to them, hey, this is social impact, this is really important, and they agreed, and they said, okay, we'll waive some of the rules. So if you think you can't do it, you got to ask. So those are some of the things that, I can bring to the table, but then there are things I can't do that foundations can do or the anchor institutions can do. And so suddenly we found that power of working together means that we can get so much more done than just what I was doing on my own or they were doing on their own. So it's been an incredible thing for me. And, the Evergreen Cooperatives are great, but we're doing a lot of other economic inclusion projects as well. And as I said, whatever we can think of, we try to go, drive somewhere, look at what else other people are doing and bring it back and do it. And it's been an incredibly rewarding experience, and it's probably kept me from retiring from government because I'm 33 years in and could make a lot more money somewhere else, but I love what I do. So that's it.
Yeah, we always find new opportunities for Tracy because she once threatened a few years ago to retire, and the whole city went, you can't retire. So we always find more work for her. Patrick?
Great, thanks everybody. My name is Patrick Horvath. I'm Director of Economic Opportunity and Vice President for Programs at the Denver Foundation. Tracy set a little bit of a precedent here by going through her life story. I will say that I was born in Milwaukee, so reach out to our friend from Madison, and I grew up in Rochester, so Mayor Warren is a great champion for that city, but that's going to be the end of my personal biography. I would like to give a shout out to those folks with the cameras and such who are doing that work on YouTube. We have a watch party going on in Denver. 30-some folks gathered, including folks from a couple of different city administrations and many folks from our Community Wealth Building Network. So go Denver. And thanks to the folks in our Community Wealth Building Network who helped to organize that. I wanted to just sort of occupying the role of philanthropy here on this panel. I actually, when I first got Cities Building Community Wealth in the mail, I sent an email to the Democracy Collaborative and said, hey, can I get some more copies of this to hand out? And they wrote back and said, sure, we'll send you some copies. By the way, do you want to come to New York and speak on this panel? I said, well, sure, why not? But I did want to kind of occupy the unique role that community foundations have in this world and in this space, because I think we're different from foundations like CERDNA in that we have our endowments are built from the communities in which we're located and are distributed back to those place-based geographies. We really are very much focused on investing in place. I wanted to just walk through a little bit of the Denver Foundation's kind of entrance into this work and talk a little bit about some of the investments that we've been making as sort of maybe lay some groundwork for our discussion later about philanthropy's role in this. And not, of course, speaking for all of philanthropy, but for the role that community foundations can play, I think. The foundation, Denver Foundation, is, as I said, 90 years old, and we only have about $5 million a year in unrestricted grant-making assets. We're constantly looking for ways to foster innovation and to nurture emerging opportunities, develop partnerships with other folks to do our work, and to do that in a collaborative way, because we just don't have that much in terms of our own assets to distribute, and because we think, as a community foundation, it's really the way that philanthropy should work. And community foundations have, I think, a unique role to convene and to collaborate and to be sort of even-handed players on the local scene to bring people together across different lines of division and to help them address unique problems to the geographies and take advantage of unique opportunities that are place-based. Up until 2013, we had a pretty traditional grant-making program, human services, arts and culture, civic and education, things like that. But we had a growing sense that our investments were not having much impact in the lives of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And so as a result, we started a process of listening, deep listening campaign that took over a year and a half with the local community, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, but also people receiving services from the groups that we were funding, as well as residents of the neighborhoods in which we were working through a grassroots grant-making program that we've run for 20 years now called Strengthening Neighborhoods. And we asked them key questions about the barriers to a high quality of life for the most vulnerable people in our community. One of the things we heard back loud and clear from that process was that a lack of access to economic opportunity was one of the main barriers that folks identified. And we weren't doing very much in that area. We invested in local CDCs, which in the Denver region are mostly focused on affordable housing. We did some small investments in nonprofits that were working with, career building, resume building, Dress for Success kinds of things. But we were not significant players in the sort of regional economic opportunity or economic development landscape. And so when we were sort of told by our own community that we're listening to, very important for us as a community foundation, that economic opportunity, lack of access to economic opportunity was a key feature that we needed to start addressing on the local scene. We pulled the folks together who had been saying that and said, okay, we heard you loud and clear, now what are we supposed to do about that? And so that was based on, rooted in a set of values that we had developed through this program, Strengthening Neighborhoods, which is a very important part of our work as a community foundation going back into the late 1990s. That is a grassroots, resident-led community development program that works directly in low-income neighborhoods, gives grants directly to groups of residents to take action on the issues that they define as most important to their own communities. And so we had a great network of folks that we could draw on to listen to who had been thinking for a long time and had been partners with us for a long time on how to develop in their own communities. And they, together with some nonprofit partners, came together and really advised us on what the shape of this should look like. And they talked about social enterprise development among the nonprofit community that would incentivize job training and employment through the nonprofit community and through businesses that those enterprises might run that would have direct links to real jobs in the local economy. They talked about community wealth building strategies. We didn't quite have the name for it at the time because we weren't familiar with the Democracy Collaborative's work. But around the same time, we took a trip to Cleveland. We met with Ted and some of his folks. We met with Tracy and some folks from the Cleveland Foundation, our sister organization, the largest and oldest community foundation in the country, which had been very involved, of course, in the Greater University Circle Initiative and was very, in incentivizing the evergreen cooperatives. We learned in that process that they had taken their board twice to Mondragon, Spain to visit with the folks at Mondragon, and our board heard about that, and we said, it's not going to happen. We'll take you to Cleveland to learn from them, but we ain't going to Spain. And we're very, very taken by that, and especially by the dialogue that was occurring there between the Cleveland Foundation, the Democracy Collaborative, and a group called Neighborhood Connections, which is the Cleveland Foundation's equivalent or the analog to the Strength in Neighborhoods program, a group that we know very well and work closely in partnership with. And the dialogue that was happening there about how community residents needed to be involved in this work from the very beginning. So that was really our entrance into the work. We then connected with the Democracy Collaborative. Steve Dubb, sitting directly out there, became a great ally of ours and has been visiting Denver a couple times a year for the last couple of years to work with some of our folks. The program that we kind of developed as a result of that focused the Economic Opportunity Program on 4 strategic pathways: growing the local economy, supporting social enterprise development within our nonprofit community, supporting worker ownership as a means of building family income and wealth, and anchor institution development. That has, for the last 3 years now, been the central framework for our work. So a little bit about our investments. The community wealth building investments that we're making now, that sort of frame has defined all of our work in this area. We are active participants in the Community Wealth Building Network, the group that's hosting the gathering in Denver that's watching us now. That group has hosted 2 community wealth building conferences in 2013 and 14, and it's becoming a more organized and formal group, and in fact a group that the Denver Foundation is likely to fund in the coming year for actual staff development. The network fostered the development or the writing of a paper on financing worker ownership and community wealth building opportunities that was led by a number of attorneys and really strong folks in finance and backgrounds in finance and public ways of doing this. That is a great resource, I think, for folks locally now. We've also been funding a number of sort of emerging opportunities. We have now in Denver something called the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center, a volunteer-led group based on some of the work of the Ohio Employee Ownership Center that, again, has just hired its first director with support from the Denver Foundation and some other funders in town. That group is primarily working on transitioning existing businesses to worker ownership. And they're also leading the charge for policy changes, particularly at the level of the Denver City Council, where they're using the examples that we're learning about from Madison and from New York and from Austin, Texas, and other cities that are investing in worker ownership at the municipal level. And so the RMEOC has really done a great job of that. We've also invested significantly in a group called the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, which is 100-year-old plus agriculturally focused cooperative development organization, primarily working on producer cooperatives in rural areas of the 3-state region that we're in, but has now become very interested in the urban scene as well, particularly with the advent of a lot of emphasis on urban agriculture. RMFU was funded by us to create their first urban co-op development project, and that group is working with low-wage, low-income and primarily immigrant communities right now to develop worker cooperatives, and is on the cusp of launching a deep incubation hub, again, something they're looking to us to help support, and some other foundations in town. So we're able to get dollars out to kind of create these initial opportunities that are providing, based on models that we're seeing around the country. The Deep Incubation Hub, for instance, developed directly on the model that the Center for Family Life here in Brooklyn is working on, and working very closely with Dowie, Democracy at Work Institute, to frame a lot of this and to get the technical elements of it. Dowie was out to train a bunch of local foundations and partners just in November, and is likely to start a contract very soon to help us lay the groundwork for a home care cooperative that we're going to be getting started in the Denver region. we also are developing a very significant anchor institution project. So again, very closely modeled on the work in Cleveland. We have a significant medical campus on the east side of Denver in the city of Aurora, a decommissioned Army base that has on it now the main institutional players in the medical scene in the Denver region, even for the whole region, beyond the Denver metro region. We have our regional children's hospital there. We have the University of Colorado Denver's main health sciences buildings, the medical school, pharmacy, nursing school, public health, the big hospital, and of course the sort of boondoggle of a VA hospital that's been getting a lot of national press and will one day be finished 3 years late and $1 billion over budget. But huge amounts of resources on that campus, over $2 billion a year in annual procurement. And they have invested in an anchor institution strategy, which is resourced by the institutions on that campus. We just got a pledge a couple of weeks ago from the leaders of those institutions to commit $600,000 in funding to continue now a 2-year-old effort called the Community Campus Partnership, which is looking for connections, building connections between the local communities, the 2 lowest income zip codes in our metro region, which are right around that hospital, to create job pipelines that are actually tying directly into jobs in the hospitals and institutions on the campus from folks in the local community who are being specifically trained for those jobs. That anchor institution work is now moving out into other institutions as well. Regis University, a Catholic Jesuit university in the northwest side of Denver, in another low-income community, has begun working with us on an anchor institution strategy. We're going to be funding the provision of a community organizer who's going to work with them to start strengthening their relationships to the local community. And we're going to be working with our transit equity collaborative called Mile High Connects, which is taking advantage of the multi-billion-dollar investment, $7.6 billion investment in our surface light rail system and commuter rail system that's being grafted onto the metro region to make sure that those public dollars are spent in a way that advances opportunity for our lowest income residents. That group is incentivizing a gathering that's going to be happening on April 4th. Steve is coming out to talk to us and to share with us on that as well. So we're working with the city of Denver as well. I'm going to wrap up my remarks more and hope to maybe talk about that a little bit when we have our conversation, but our Office of Economic Development is starting to move in this direction as well with some really terrific programs. So look forward to the conversation, and I think that's all for now.
Thank you, Patrick. So Elena, we're going to hear from St. Paul, Minnesota.
Partners from St. Paul and Minneapolis. Yeah, I'm not going to follow the precedent of telling my story, but I know that there are folks in Minnesota and on the east side of St. Paul that are watching, so I'll give them a shout out, and my mama too, actually. So got to give a shout out to my mama. Being the one rep of the community-based organizations on this panel today, I feel like a little bit of pressure. I have to represent all of our people well. Nexus is a community building intermediary, and so we work to build more engaged and powerful communities of color. We work at the intersection of community, government, philanthropy, anchor institutions, and community and economic development practitioners. So we sit at the nexus of all of those. We do our work primarily around grant making. We leverage dollars from large foundations, and we get those out into communities where we see promise. We provide technical assistance to our grantee partners, which is different than many other intermediaries or foundations. And we also do a significant amount of work in bridging and connecting among our partners. One of the things that we've also been focused more on, based upon our learnings, is really looking at shifting systems, right? So you have to create the environment in which this work happens, and that takes time. And so what we've learned about building community, building cities, is that you have to have and see the intersection between community engagement, between leadership, and community wealth building. And it's with those three components, that's when you have sustainable communities, right? So what do we mean by that? If you think about authorship, in community, and you think about community voice, you have to, there's a lot of learning and sharing that needs to happen in that arena. You know, it's not just about, let's have a meeting and people give community input, and practitioners, government, philanthropy, residents can come and learn and share what they know about community engagement. Our work around leadership acknowledges that all members of community should have the ability to represent themselves and their neighbors at multiple tables, and that we have to begin to change the face of leadership. So we have been, for the last 3 years, running a program called the Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute, and that is, we work with cohorts of fellows, people of color primarily, that are trained to serve on appointed boards and commissions, those boards and commissions that influence policy and investment in our region. So for example, we have fellows that are sitting on the Metropolitan Council's Transit Advisory Board. We have someone on the Ramsey County Workforce Improvement Board. And so identify and cultivate those leaders and then create formal structures to support those leaders in moving into different positions. And then the third piece, community wealth building, which is my favorite thing, and how we've come to this table. For the last 10 years, Nexus has been focused, we've talked about asset and wealth building in communities, right? Small business development, entrepreneurship, home ownership, individual asset building. But despite our best efforts and the efforts of others, disparities continue to rise. The Twin Cities has the highest disparity, employment disparities between white and African Americans in the country. So we know that we need a new approach, a new way of looking at things. And so we've been working with the Democracy Collaborative now for the past couple of years, and have shifted and adopted a community wealth building framework and set of related practices to begin to shift the landscape in the Twin Cities away from traditional economic development models that have failed to produce the type of economic activity and outcomes that we need. And so we've adopted a framework. Our framework also looks at culture as a key driver for community wealth. You can't continue to create economic strategies and models that don't acknowledge the culture of the people in those communities, right? If you look at the history of cooperative economics in this country, the African American community has a deep, rich history. So our community wealth building framework incorporates culture as one of the key drivers for community wealth. So we've just begun this work. We have it in our strategic plan now, and we, over this next year, are really doing work around cultivating champions, elevating the narrative. Like you know, we have to start talking about community wealth building as a new framework, and because really we are pushing against a very long-held paradigm of how you do development. And so this year we will be launching a curriculum that my colleague is developing in partnership with LaDonna Sanders around the history of Black cooperative economics. So you have to get back to people's history and to do that readiness work, right? Right alongside that you are having new models emerge, you can't forget that you have to do that. It's that engagement piece, that leadership piece, and then also just the knowledge, right? So we'll be launching that this year. We'll be doing a series of convenings on different topics related to community wealth building. Project Equity is going to be working with us to do an ecosystem mapping around worker cooperatives. And then we also will continue to convene we have a cross-sector group on the East Side called the East Side Economic Growth Initiative, and that group, which is comprised of culturally based organizations, traditional social service, anchor institutions, they themselves have adopted a community wealth building framework. And so they keep one another in check as they go out to do their work. They'll be like, wait, does this feel Does this fit the framework? Are we living the principles and the values of community wealth building? And so, because we know that Next as community partners alone is not going to be able to shift this landscape, we have to bring others along with us. Hopefully we can get into some examples of how we're operationalizing that during the discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Elena. Rebecca from Madison, Wisconsin.
Hi, thanks. I'm Rebecca Kemble, and I'm not the president of the Common Council, and I'm not a long-term member of the Common Council. I was just elected last April. I am a long-term president of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, however, and a long-term worker cooperator and taxi cab driver with Union Cab of Madison, thanks first incarnation of Mayor Soglin. So I could talk about a million things right now, and I think maybe I will give one or two sentences of my personal history, which was I bailed out on a highfalutin academic career in which I was studying neocolonialism in Africa which is totally relevant to today, people. It's totally relevant to the domestic colonial economic policy that is happening today. But at any rate, I bailed out on that as I really saw felt the urgency of the ecological, social, and economic crises that this was Gulf in the war, 2003, and I thought, you know what, my energy needs to be spent not like battling egos in an academic institution, but actually building the worker co-op movement, which as a worker cooperator myself, I saw the incredible value of, both for its members and for the community. And I could tell you about how, Union Cab and other worker co-ops, by virtue of the fact that they make decisions based on the collective will of their membership, can fight back against some of this privatization, and how we did maintain some industry wage standards for taxi drivers in Dane County when the state privatized medical transportation, and we were up against a fight of having to do more work for less wages and drug test ourselves and all of that, and how because our membership rejected our general manager's recommendation to sign the contract, we not only maintained that business on our terms, but did that for the other companies providing that service. And that's just, one really specific way to Ms. Davison from Detroit, I don't know if she's still here, but economically, how economic democracy really can, even at that small scale level, can build power in the community. So we talked about having to root economic development in place. And I would also add, we need it rooted in values and in people. Not just place, but the people who live there, and the very specific needs, geniuses, skills, productive capacities of the people who live there. And that's what worker cooperatives are really uniquely designed to organize. So when Mayor Soglin announced in 2014 $1 million a year for 5 years for worker co-op, city-led worker co-op development, I thought, well, I could be on the sidelines griping about how it's not being done right, or I could just run for public office and be at the table. So I ran for public office and got elected, and worked really hard to get elected, and got out into my neighborhoods, which have the highest concentrations of poverty in the city, and also the highest diversity of especially immigrant populations. And because I talked to them, I talked to people, I had already friends in those neighborhoods. They turned out and voted for me. And so we're talking, I'm kind of going to go off on a little tangent about democracy here, but for me, this is really what this is all about. It's about building power in the community, not and we can't address, Mayor Soglin talked about the gap between our values and the broken bodies. And it's not that the people espousing the values don't want to address the broken bodies. It's they don't know what to do. We collectively, as policymakers, don't know what to do. And this is one way I felt I could add value to our city policymaking and decision-making body, to add value and do something really concrete, and bring all of the, my many co-conspirators in the audience right here, and all of the collective knowledge around how we build, well, to My Cities project. So what we've done is the project is about to start, and for the last year, city staff and key partners in the community have got together and really talked about how do we build accountable and representative leadership in the project? How do we do clear thinking about goals, which were stated, which the mayor stated? This needs to be about addressing the racial disparities and inequities, dealing with the most highly exploited workers in our community and low-wage workers. How do we leverage these city resources to bring in other partnerships? And really, it's been quite amazing because he referenced the body of work that predated this 2014, and I would say it really started ramping up in 2011 with all the union busting. And the unions turned out. And I think, well, I know for sure there was a lot of disappointment amongst rank and file members that their leadership was willing to deal with this guy. And they were realizing what not only are unions busted, but some of we're not democratic institutions ourselves to a large degree, and we need to revitalize our internal democracy. We need more membership. So the worker co-ops were out on the streets with the unions, and we said, oh, we can help you with your internal democracy, but the worker co-ops got this really intense experience of the power of mass mobilization, the power of unions, the power of collective action. And that started the relationships between worker co-ops and union locals and the Federation of Labor, where we started talking to unions about co-ops. Then came a landmark report in 2013, this Race to Equity report, which showed that Madison on many, especially around criminal justice, is the worst in the country in terms of racial disparities, as well as economic indicators. And that really pierced the conscience of our progressive value people. And there is all of a sudden this political will to actually do something about it, to take some risks, so that when this project came to a vote for the council, there was no objection at all. I've got a minute. I can talk a lot more about the details, especially the partnerships with the unions that are just going to be critical, as well as with local activist groups, people who are, making the mayors and our life difficult sometimes by coming to meetings and yelling at us and saying, we need you to do better. I guess I'll just leave it with that.
Thank you. Thank you. Roger Green, please.
So I think first, just want to give thanks, thank Carmen from the Community and Economic Development Clinic at CUNY and the One Worker, One Vote project, and my good friend Michael Peck there, for continuing to inspire myself and those of us in Brooklyn who have been working on this issue or the mission of economic democracy, trying to create space for economic democracy in the People's Republic of Brooklyn. Want to thank you very much. And I mean that just because part of this work starts with a inspiring radical imagination to look at the current system that we're in, both the political economy and the political institutions, and how they have, in fact, impacted on contributing to the underdevelopment of certain communities, particularly communities of color. So my background, I come out of human rights and civil rights movements, and I was elected to the state legislature several years ago, retired about 7 years ago, actually served with Carl Hastie, the current Speaker of the Assembly, served in the state legislature for around 25 to 26 years. And when I left office, I received an appointment to one of the CUNY colleges, Meg Evers College, named after a civil rights leader, icon of the civil rights, human rights movement. And we began to have a discourse about within the public policy center that I'm the director of, the Du Bois Bunch Center for Public Policy, named after Dr. Du Bois and Ralph Bunche. We began to have a discourse about the crisis within our community. And as we had this discourse, we were connected with the local unions who were in a major fight to keep one of the hospitals open. Hospital was going to close, called Interfaith Hospital, which is in central Brooklyn. And this was one of 5 hospitals that had closed in central Brooklyn. And it had reached a point where the community basically said, no more. So in our capacity at the Du Bois Bunch, I was charged with becoming a member of the coalition and then became the chair of the coalition to save Interfaith Hospital, which was a coalition of organized labor, Local 1199, New York State Nurses Association, the Central Brooklyn Clergy Association, and several other community-based organizations. During the course of that struggle, we came to the conclusion that the reason that the hospital was closing was because, in part, of the crisis in our democracy. One, the crisis in the democracy of our political economy, which is not democratic, and the crisis within our institutions in the communities, which are anti-democratic also, both reflecting more of a hierarchical model of management. And you're absolutely correct. In fact, I have a term here that we've concluded what we call a system of welfare colonialism, a policy or practice where powerful plutocrats and bureaucrats extend economic and political control over the social welfare programs and institutions that serve marginalized communities of color and working families. That's our term. We actually came up with that after observing through struggle what was happening at Interfaith, where we had these plutocrats coming in, informed by the larger political economy, basically ripping off the resources from the institution, and as a result, these institutions were closing with no real viable services for the larger community, and also creating enhanced or increased alienation between the workers and the management. You know, we saw that firsthand. And so the union leadership at Neisner and 1199 said, look, just go at it. You know, we've had it, come up with a new vision, and we'll fight for it. So our first struggle was to remove the management, and it took us a minute, but we got them out of there. And actually next week, a new manager will be coming in, someone who we vetted. We had a fight to get at the table to vet securing new management, and we feel very confident that a sister by the name of LaRae Brown will become the first African-American CEO of a major private hospital in Brooklyn. And I'm going to say private in quotes also. It is a nonprofit hospital that actually is a public hospital because of all the public dollars that's invested in the hospital via Medicaid and Medicare. And that was one of the contradictions that we found also, basically that the workers would go with us to Albany to fight and to meet with Carl to secure resources from the governor and the state legislature to keep the hospital open. But once we secured those resources, the corrupt institution was still in place. That is that it was anti-democratic. Again, a reflection of the crisis in our democracy. And so we began the process of basically saying that we needed to change that. And to do that by beginning to explore moving toward a system of one worker, one vote as reflected in workplace democracy, and also to move towards the formulation of a worker-owned cooperative for this hospital. And then beyond that, looking at creating a larger ecosystem in which there would be stakeholders, perhaps unionized worker-owned cooperatives, linked to the larger healthcare system within central Brooklyn. And so that's the sojourn that we've been on, it's been quite a movement. And I think over the last few days, in fact, last 2 weeks, we've seen even more traction in terms of how we're moving in that direction. We feel very good about the support that we're receiving from organized labor, particularly 1199 and NYSNA, New York State Nurses Association. And we feel confident that, particularly given the support that in collaboration with groups like the CUNY One Worker, One Vote initiative and Mondragon, that we're moving in the right direction. So I know I'll end there and be open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think since we've run a little bit behind, and I think all of the panelists I was able to talk to were so impressed by the engagement and the questions from you all the last time, rather than me facilitate a dialogue, what I'd like to suggest, if it's all right with you, Carmen, that we just go to questions from the audience. And as people are lining up, do you want to do the same thing? Just a couple themes I heard. As people were talking up here, I started asking myself the question, why is it that each of these really extraordinary civic leaders in their community has moved in this direction? And a couple things I heard as you're lining up. Tracy mentioned she came to a conclusion that the use of precious public resources can be better devoted to companies that are committed to staying in the community and are loyal to the community rather than chasing the next good deal. Patrick mentioned that in their listening campaign, what came through loud and clear was the need for economic opportunity. And these strategies make a way to help create that opportunity in the community of Denver. And given the precious and quite limited resources that the Denver community found, it's clear that that foundation can't resolve all the problems of the community on its own tab. And therefore, this sort of strategy, particularly the anchor institution piece, is a way to bring in vastly greater resources into the mix to supplement the precious resources of the foundation. And Elena talked about the commitment of Nexus to not just do good work and improve things a bit, but to really engage in fundamental transformation of the system in the communities, in the Twin Cities. And that in order to produce that sustainable community transformation, she and her colleagues, and Rapa Mecca is here, give a shout out to Rapa, our good brother, concluded that there was a nexus of leadership and engagement and community wealth building that, if brought together, could have a chance of creating that systemic change. Rebecca talked about the importance of building power in the community, and it's all about democracy. That's a response to the question, why do this kind of work? And Roger, I loved your phrase. It inspires radical imagination. God knows if we need anything in this country right now, it's radical imagination. And that through this process, we could create a truly democratic system and bring democracy to the workplace. So on that note, now that people are lined up, I'd like to go to the first question of any or all of the panelists.
Hi, my name is Tyrone Granstern. I'm from the New School, and my question is sort of a riff off of the Democratic Socialists of America, our friend from the Democratic Socialists of America. It's about scalability, and it's specific to Union Cab. Do you know if there's any interest or push to get them to do the same sort of user interface or tech that Uber does so that they can expand even within Madison, but more importantly, outside of Madison to the whole country? And then maybe for everyone else, is there any effort to do similar things for other groups where we can scale and see these things expand all across the country and all across the world? Thank you.
Great.
For Union Cab, yes, and Mayor Solglin has made it clear that he would love it if all the cab companies in Madison could collaborate on one single citywide app, and those efforts are happening. We all each have our individual apps. What we don't have is, a $50 billion valuation and money to throw around to lobbyists and lawyers, but oh well. And let me just address that issue of scale in terms of our city project, because I didn't get to really describe it very much. But the approach, this project, it's not, $600,000 a year for 5 years, and then that's all it is. It's sort of a stone soup approach where the city brings the pot and puts the first stone in, and already 2 community foundations, a cooperative, CDFI, 3 credit unions have already committed resources to add to that financially. Multiple community-based organizations, as well as union locals and union organizations, have committed to doing training like real skills training, workforce training. Cooperative development organizations have committed to bringing their and our expertise and knowledge around governance issues, cooperative management issues, as well as some evaluation things. So what this project will do, if it'll be successful if after 5 years there's enough capacity embedded in each one of those partner institutions and community-based organizations, from the frontline workers' justice organizations to the board of directors of community foundations, that everyone knows, number one, how to do worker co-op development, number two, how to access all of the support services for worker co-op development, and number three, knows how to speak publicly and really state the case of what a powerful economic development tool with justice this really is.
Thank you. Tracy would like to say something about scale.
Yeah, and in Cleveland, we have 3 economic development, 3 evergreen cooperatives. We're up to 131 jobs. The average salary, hourly wage is about $13.94, which for New York, I know that sounds really small, but in Cleveland, that goes a long way. But they've had bumps in the road. They're all startup organizations. We've put in a significant amount of capital in them. And even with the support of our anchor institutions that are kind of buying the products and services of these organizations, they still need to grow beyond that. So to bring those to a further scale, we're still really experimenting and figuring out how to actually just grow it from the ground up, even with the support of the institutions. And I think what we've learned is to diversify and to really try all different types of companies and all different types of strategies for place-based economic development. And so we're doing a lot of different things. The cooperatives is one. We've got, I think, one more that we're about to launch now. But the way to scale it is to try lots of different things, I think, and not necessarily to really replicate everything that we're doing.
Patrick, and then.
Sure. I just wanted to mention that question of scale, too, because it's very much in the front and center for us in Denver. We had folks from Democracy at Work Institute out, Melinda was out recently to talk to us about just how to get going with things. Just go do it. Don't just sort of create a task force or do a technical assistance rollout or something like that. And so the notion of a deep incubation hub for worker co-op development, sort of like the Center for Family Life is done here in Brooklyn, which I mentioned earlier, they have the potential to spin off large numbers of co-ops to actually get them going. And I think to be successful, especially with folks coming out of immigrant communities where maybe the entrepreneurial background is not, the business background is not strong, smaller scale businesses, but a lot of them in marketable niches that can be profitable is a better way to go in many ways, I think, than some enormous one-size-fits-all or huge 100 or 1,000 worker cooperative. So the idea of starting many small businesses that are cooperative in nature and having the resources to do that, which I think the philanthropic community can do. They can help to build that deep incubation hub, which then can take advantage of market opportunities to launch large numbers of co-ops is one way that we're thinking about it too.
Great. Roger?
Yeah, I think that pedagogy is important in terms of getting to scale also, so that the work that CUNY is doing in terms of formulating a certificate program and worker cooperative is important. And the commitment they've made with our college to work with Mondragon University in creating a joint baccalaureate master's degree program in the discipline of managing worker-owned cooperatives, I think, is important as well. And so that's what we're working on at MEGR. And then I think also the concept of intercooperation, a network of different cooperatives that are linked within one particular community, so that in Central Brooklyn, we just launched a ESCO entitled Citizen Share, that we're looking at training up and a worker-owned cooperative to install wireless monitoring systems within the public housing system. And it's going to be, we're doing that in conjunction with a group of called Mothers on the Move, who are in public housing. And so we see all of this as being linked. And of course, also looking at initially a community land trust where the hospital itself would be owned as part of a limited equity co-op. The assets would be owned as part of a limited equity co-op that would be linked to the ESCO as well. So we could reduce the cost of operating the hospitals, but it would also be cooperatively owned by the community and the workers.
One last thing to say on scale before we go forward. A lot of what we've been talking about is starting up businesses, kind of, de novo, from the ground up. That's what Evergreen is. There's another huge opportunity in this nation if we're really interested in going to scale, and that's what some are calling the silver tsunami, by which they mean people around my age, baby boomers, who are going to be retiring. In the next approximately 10 years, over 7 million closely held businesses in America are going to change hands because the owners are retiring. And it's estimated only 10% of those, if I have the figures right, Marjorie, who's working on this matter, only 10% are actually going to transfer ownership to the kids. Because in Cleveland, the kids have moved to Brooklyn, and they may not want to come back. They want to be hip in Brooklyn. And so what happens to those other 90% of those 7 million companies? There's two ways this could go. Either sell them to competitors, and people will inevitably lose their jobs, and it'll be consolidated, so we'll lose those jobs. Or transfer ownership through co-ops and through ESOPs, and their efforts on this gearing up all over the country, which provides advantages in terms of capital gains to the owner of the company as he or she retires, and provides a transfer of ownership to the workers. So if we want to talk about scale, there is a huge scaling opportunity. Next question.
Thank you. My name is Anna Burnham. I'm a community organizer in the Southeast Bronx. So we have a saying in organizing that nothing about us without us is for us. And in the spirit of the Black Lives Movement that I think really has elevated the consciousness of racial dynamics in this country, we have a panel that is overwhelmingly white and has a lot of power. I want to know specifically, what do you do to use your privilege, both racially and also in a position of power, to elevate the voices of the communities that we're talking about and make sure that they have a platform? And also with this silver wave that you're talking about, what can we do to ensure that that 90% is going to minority-owned businesses?
Would any of our panelists like to?
Yeah, I'll
Rebecca,
address
you want to
that.
start?
I mean, really, my whole impetus for running for city council and for building worker co-ops is really to share what I know, share my expertise, share bring what I have to the people who need it most. And that, in my community, that is very clearly people of color, immigrant people, low-wage workers who are highly exploited. And it really is the driving force of why I wanted to be at the table, to make sure that those people who we say, or who I say I feel like could really benefit from what I know about this, are at the table making decisions. And because we didn't have a lot of time, I didn't really get into describe how we're bringing all of these coalition of people and these most impacted people to the table to make decisions and to do that. But that really is kind of the driving force. I don't speak for anyone. I know what I know. I know it helps build collective power which is what is needed most in those neighborhoods and those communities. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Elena?
Okay, so then I'm going to talk about my bio. Like the rest of the panel, my first gig out of college was actually being a tenant organizer. And so, yes, I'm a program officer now, and so my background is in community organizing. And so I take very seriously the stewardship of the resources that we have at Nexus and getting those into communities of color and acknowledge the privilege that I hold in this position now. You know, when I talked earlier about community engagement and leadership and community wealth building and how that comes together and how we are focused on ensuring that, you know, this community wealth building framework, if we aren't really focused very intentionally on the people and the place, could very well become just another economic development framework. If we don't ensure that the engagement pieces really happen. So for an example, in this neighborhood in South Minneapolis, the Phillips neighborhood, very low-income neighborhood, a lot of indigenous peoples, communities of color, immigrant groups, and a lot of historic toxic uses. And so we're working right now with 5 different culturally based organizations to have that area designated a green zone. And so with a green zone designation, then the metrics are different in terms of how investments are made in the city of Minneapolis. And so that area could then have access to additional investment dollars for redevelopment, right? But what we know about how traditional economic development has functioned is just because you get that designation doesn't mean then that the dollars that come into the community are going to be anchored to that place or to the people in that place. So we could have these 5 organizations doing the engagement work and then not yield any of the economic benefits. And so one of the, through that engagement work, then there is a resident then that is now sitting on an advisory board with the city of Minneapolis to be able to influence those conversations, right? So the engagement then and the leadership, so now we have this whole, you know, we're starting to put together the whole package. But then if people aren't prepared to be driving the economic models that are created, right? So great, we're going to have $2 million. I just made that amount up, but let's just say $2 million. And those dollars then go to firms that are owned outside of the community. Then we haven't done anything. We haven't used our position. We haven't used our privilege to create any long-term systemic change. And so when I spoke earlier about the curriculum for African Americans and their history with cooperative economics, that's where the community wealth building piece comes in, right? So how then are these folks that have been organizing to get this green zone going to benefit economically, right? So preparing people to be driving new economic models that fit within their cultural history. And so thank you for that question. It's important.
I think Roger wanted the last word on this.
Yeah, so I think the question is, one, obviously you have to look at, you know, certain contradictions that exist with respect to the institutional racism that exists and the struggles that we have to deal with in terms of that. We saw that with Interfaith. I remember sitting in a meeting with the CEO of Interfaith, and we were asking him why he was outsourcing all of these jobs and that they were only white professionals who were coming in for these positions. And he literally said, well, it's a crisis, we have to move quickly, and you know it's a good old boys network, you know, quotable quote, which also helped to galvanize our community to get him the hell out of there, you know. But then, as I said, we recently won the victory of having this, I think, a very progressive African-American female who will be the new CEO for Interfaith. But we had to pause, put on the brakes, and say that that's not enough. Because if, in fact, we don't engage in democratic structuring to ensure that there's opportunities and space for participatory democracy from the community, to inform how the institution is going to move forward and be transformed. And if we don't ensure that there's workplace democracy, that we end the traditional culture of master to servant relationships, culture that has existed going back to feudal times, that if we don't change that culture, it's God. Because even if they are African American or Latino, we have found that there's a struggle around those kinds of issues. We replace the racial contradictions with class contradictions. So our position is that we need the democratic structuring, workplace democracy, participatory democracy for the community. If we're going to study the issue, we want to study it based upon participatory action research. We want participatory planning, and we want participatory budgeting as well as we move forward with this institution. Yeah.
Thank
Ted,
you. Sure,
there's just one
Rebecca.
more point about accountability there, that it's really, to address that point, multiple levels of accountability, but why it'll be so important to get the right metrics and the right evaluation systems for, this project or any project. What are we measuring? Why are we measuring it? And that has to be really clearly stated about this is the impact we want to have, and how are we going to measure that impact, and how do we hold the people participating in the program accountable for either having it or not, because we don't want to end up like Mayor Warren said with, program rich and results poor. And that means reaching out to whole new groups of people, to whole new, not just the usual suspects in the community who say they represent these sections of the community, but like in any city kind of issue at all. And that means, beating the pavement and going out and meeting people where they are.
Great. We'll take questions for about 7 more minutes. So quick questions, quick answers, and
Hi, my name is Oscar Abello, and I'm a reporter for Next City. And I want to ask you how I can do my job better. So we haven't heard a lot today about CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. These are, just very briefly, institutions that are definitely targeting low to moderate income areas. In some cases, they are implicitly targeting people and women of color to create business ownership, to create home ownership, to create jobs. And more, they're explicitly targeting communities of color and women and immigrant communities. There's in the city of Minneapolis, there's a program that encourages CDFIs to provide Sharia-compliant loans, for instance. CDFIs are also probably one of the biggest parts of this community wealth-building ecosystem. There are already around $68 billion a year in assets under management, and I've seen some estimates where that is growing at $1 billion a year. So my question, I guess, to you is, what questions do you have for CDFIs? What issues, limitations, concerns would you want to express to them that I can go out and continue writing about them as I've been doing, and have better questions for them that are more relevant to the folks in this space?
Well, I just want to ask why the majority of new market tax credits go into wealthy communities that have just a tiny pocket of poverty, and cities like Cleveland get shut out on a regular basis, an area that is a majority community that has the second highest amount of poverty in the nation, and I can't get a new market tax credit to get a project to move forward, but the city of Boston, that's down to about 4 blocks, can get repeatedly amounts after amounts after amounts. I'm from Boston originally, so I'm very familiar with it. So,
well, tell us how you really feel, Tracy.
So that'd be my question.
A good one.
I just
Rebecca?
have a plug for one particular CDFI which is most generous with their expertise and knowledge of funding cooperatives and worker cooperatives, and that is the formerly North Country Cooperative Development Fund, which is now called the Shared Capital Cooperatives, and they're a great resource and willing to share with other CDFIs some really nitty-gritty loan analysis aspects of funding worker co-ops.
Great. And I won't respond, but we'd love to talk to you more at the Democracy Collaborative. We've got a lot of ideas. Please.
Hi, I'm Courtney Rinden. I'm an undergrad at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And so we're talking about community institutions with community wealth building, but I feel like we're leaving some of them out of the picture, at least as represented by this panel. And so I was wondering if you could speak to the potential opportunity for inclusion of local chambers of commerce and historical societies as other alternative organizations that serve to represent the best interests and also the roots of communities and prosperous futures.
Tracy?
Well, I'll just say that when you're dealing with chambers of commerce, not all are created equal, shall we say. And what I've found is they're membership organizations, and many times very large business control of those organizations. And I've had numerous times when the Chamber of Commerce, instead of trying to benefit the residents of my community, they just recently called me and said that one of their members wanted a road closed because a drunk driver hit in front of their building. And I explained that that would require the trucks from all of the companies behind this company to have to go through a residential neighborhood. And the individual explained to me, oh, well, but they live near businesses, and so, you know, they shouldn't mind. And I said, well, would you like them to go through your neighborhood? Apparently, he thought that was different. So I would say that chambers of commerce, you know, maybe in a smaller community it might be different, but I think in large communities I see that there's a lot of membership and a lot of power for the larger members that may not be benefiting the residents of my community.
Elena, and then Roger.
You know, when we think about how are we going to shift the landscape, then we have to acknowledge that groups like chambers of commerce or historical societies or other organizations we have to begin to have conversations so that those entities can see themselves in the work, right? And that's why I think that the community wealth building framework and the key drivers are so powerful, because what they do is they allow for multiple, we talk about it like multiple lanes, multiple access points. And so it would take 100 years to completely undo the systems of traditional economic development. And so how do we begin to bring to the table practitioners, chambers of commerce? I mean, yes, I could say some things as well, but I won't. So we have to find ways that they can then see themselves in the work, because they have assets and knowledge to share. I would just say that.
The Chamber of Commerce in New York have, I think, far too often been engaged in crony capitalism, and contributed to the monopoly formulation that crushes small as a free market. That's my humble opinion. And so we've tried to identify some strategic alliances with folks who are prepared to create new space. And so, for instance, with our ESCO that we created, we did that with the New York State Association of Minority Contractors and with some other small businesses, a joint venture, who were engaged in high-tech development, you know. And I think that, for us, that's our model. Because, I'm just not prepared, we were not prepared to invest time in changing or working with folks that we think have been far too invested in contributing to some of the contradictions that we see in our political economy. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take a lesson from our friend Harold Meyerson. Given the amount of time, if each of the remaining three, people, could just offer your question, and we'll get it all out or comment, we'll get it all on the table. A couple may be able to respond, and then we'll pick it up at the reception, because y'all are the last thing between food and alcohol for us. So the pressure's on, man.
I've already ordered food.
Hi, my name's Mike Menser. I'm president of the Participatory Budgeting Project, and really my question flows out of comments, the last couple comments. And I teach at Brooklyn College and at CUNY, and we're going to have 2 PBs going on at CUNY next year, Roger, and I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Okay.
We're in 16 cities now. Participatory budgeting is a process by which the community actually gets direct control over public money. And if you want to talk about scale and sustainability, there's no way of doing this without direct control over public money.
That's right.
If it's not working for you, it's working against you.
That's right.
And I think that, so my question is, in the processes that you're currently involved in, have you utilized participatory budgeting, or do you have any plans to utilize participatory budgeting? Again, we're in 16 cities now. It's spread quite considerably in the last 2 years especially. But then also, to Roger's point, do you have, and I've heard this from you a couple times, do you have, or what specific ideas do you have about making your own internal democratic? Because a lot of times we like democratic control over foundation money and other pots of money.
Harold?
Hi, I'm Harold Simon. This is an awesome panel. I'm with Shelter Force Magazine, which was started by community organizers 40 years ago. And since then, we've had a fundamental belief in the power of organizing and the importance of unions. So this is a question to Rebecca, but pretty much anyone. Are the co-ops unionized? And if they are, how's that work? And if they're not, like why? Fundamental incompatibility, et cetera?
Great, thank you, Harold. I'm sure, let's get the last question, then we'll, and finally.
Hi, my name is Romano Chapelican. I'm with the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development. My question is kind of directed to everyone, and similarly inspired based on similar comments that were coming out before and during the Q&A. So I guess just in terms of this larger discussion about community development and being more equitable and getting everyone engaged, what specific strategies have you seen with your own organizations, whether it's in philanthropy or more directly with the organizing aspect of it? What's the angle that's worked best for you, whether it's approaching this through a racial lens, through a labor lens, through a cultural lens, through a language lens? What tactics have worked best for you, and what lessons would you have for other folks who are looking to do similar things on a local level?
Standing. We could have had the panelists be the questioners and flipped it around here. So we've got 3 or 4 minutes. Roger, did you want to respond to at least one of those?
Yeah. Again, the largest co-op in the country is a $11.99 unionized worker cooperative called the Cooperative Home Care Associates, 2,000 workers in the Bronx. And it serves as one of the models. It's not, because I don't think there's a monolithic approach to how unions would work in the context of unionized worker cooperatives, but it is a model. And even the union is studying that in terms of how that might be applied to the transformation of Interfaith Hospital. Then in the context of participatory budgeting, the other thing that we just yesterday had, 2 days ago, an agreement with that as part of a unionized worker health care / recreational center in Brooklyn that will be part of a collaboration with the hospitals and the unions, that we will do this as part of participatory budgeting, looking at the community benefit agreement that is part of the Affordable Care Act. I don't know if folks know that each hospital is now required to establish a community benefit agreement. With healthcare being the largest industry or sector in Brooklyn and New York City, I think that's something for folks to look at. But again, to apply principles of participatory budgeting to that. And that's what we just got an agreement just a few days ago on that.
Great. Rebecca?
On the unionized co-op, so there are several locals, painters and allied trades, sheet metal workers, food and commercial workers who are interested in, and other building trades too, in organizing people in the food business and also in residential construction. Because in Wisconsin anyways, little, if any, of the residential construction is done by union labor.
Yeah.
And in some of the trades like painting and roofing, those are some of the highest, most highly exploited and most high rates of injury, the roofers, that there are. So those union locals are interested in organizing those workers into unionized worker co-ops affiliated with their locals with access to, you know, all of the benefits as well as responsibilities of union membership. So that's one model. Another model is, you know, something Ted was talking about, conversions. We have a situation in our town right now where Oscar Mayer, Berkshire Hathaway and Brazilian billionaires decided to close down our local Oscar Mayer plant, which was the original Oscar Mayer plant, which employs 6 construction workers who are organized by the UFCW. And, you know, they're recognized in the region as some of the best skilled workforce in the region. And, you know, there could in the future be a possibility of them or those workers organizing, they're already unionized, but organizing into a co-op to continue some kind of food production at that site. So that would be another model.
Great.
And the participatory budgeting, I think the really key to that is who shows up, and I've thought about that a lot, and I go to a lot of my neighborhood association meetings and neighborhood meetings, and sometimes you don't really want those people making that certain collection of people who always show up, who have an outsized privilege and power, and that, you know, like really are those people going to decide on the budget? So there's a lot of groundwork that has to be done. I would love to see a people general assembly structure for, I mean, I'm kind of working on that with 4th and 5th graders in my district right now, getting them used to participating in decisions that are meaningful to them. So there's a lot of groundwork to be had there.
And our last comment will be from Patrick, if that's all right.
Sure, and it's probably just speaking to a small part of the question, but about how some of these other institutions, such as philanthropy, of course, what I'm thinking when you ask about democratizing our other institutions, how it can be more democratic in the way that it operates. In the area of family foundations and such, which control most of the philanthropic wealth in this country, that's a challenge because the families control what goes on. But many of them, like CERDNA, for instance, are very, very invested in the processes of democratic governance, and so there's hope there. And the engaging with folks who live in the communities that are most affected by the philanthropic investments being part of the decision-making structure within those foundations. And so what it's allowed us to do through our Strength in Neighborhoods program, which is our grassroots grant-making program, is to identify folks who are partners with us in local communities that we can then bring into the leadership structure of the foundation. They've stood up in their own communities and said, this is what we're willing to put on the line to make our own communities better, and then we'll tap them into our grant-making committees, and then through the process of understanding how the Denver Foundation works and how we make decisions, elevate them to other positions, so that we've got probably one of the most socioeconomically and racially diverse boards of trustees of any community foundation that I'm familiar with, because we have cultivated leadership through that grassroots program. And I do think there's a real challenge to philanthropy to do more of that.
Thank you, Patrick. So it is exactly 5 o'clock. I want to say today we've been fortunate to hear from colleagues, brothers and sisters, friends who live in Cleveland, Denver, the Twin Cities, Madison, Brooklyn, Newark, Rochester, and the Bronx. And I just got a text here from someone who said, I'm watching you in Amarillo, Texas. So you know if you've made it in Amarillo, you've made it. So if we could thank our panel. Thank you so much. We were going to have concluding remarks by Marjorie, but she said, nah, it's great. So thank you so much, and we look forward to hanging out with you at the reception.